Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Selamat datang dalam peluncuran Laporan Perdagangan dan Investasi Berkelanjutan Indonesia dan Decarbonization for Development DfD Lab Lecture. Perkenalkan, saya Rania Teguh, pembawa acara pada kesempatan kali ini. Setahun telah berlalu sejak Decarbonization for Development DfD Lab diluncurkan oleh CSIS Indonesia. Perjalanan penuh dedikasi dan kolaborasi untuk menjembatani ilmu pengetahuan dan kebijakan dalam mengatasi krisis iklim dan mendorong pembangunan berkelanjutan di Indonesia. Mari kita simak video kinerja DfD Lab 1 tahun ke belakang.
Decarbonization for Development Lab atau DfD Lab adalah inisiatif CSIS Indonesia untuk mendorong kebijakan ekonomi yang efisien, adil, dan sejalan dengan target Net Zero Emission 2060. Setelah resmi diluncurkan pada Juni 2023, implementasi 3 pilar DfD Lab telah terlaksana secara efektif dan berdampak. DfD Lab telah melakukan 2 penelitian utama. Pertama, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism Modeling yang menilai dampak potensial dari mekanisme penyesuaian perbatasan karbon Uni Eropa dan implikasinya bagi transisi energi di Indonesia. Kedua, Sustainability, Trade and Investment Review yang mendalami tata kelola mineral kritis di Indonesia dalam keterkaitan keberlanjutan, perdagangan, dan investasi. Dalam 1 tahun terakhir, 22 acara jejaring telah terlaksana dengan lebih dari 500 partisipasi publik, institusi akademik, dan pemerintah. DfD Lab turut menghadirkan dashboard yang menyajikan visualisasi dataset pilar dekarbonisasi industri di Indonesia, yakni energi, ekonomi, dan iklim. Telusuri lebih jauh Decarbonization for Development Lab, inisiatif bagi kemajuan dekarbonisasi Indonesia dari CSIS Indonesia.
Once again, just for a housekeeping note, the first session of this event will be conducted in Indonesian. So if you do need interpreter device, please feel free to use the ones provided in your seats. Thank you. Dekarbonisasi ekonomi dan transisi energi berkeadilan adalah kebijakan penting untuk Indonesia mencapai visi Indonesia Emas dan emisi nol bersih atau net zero emissions. Penelitian berbasis bukti diperlukan untuk kebijakan iklim yang efektif, terutama bagi para pembuat kebijakan di tengah perkembangan tensi geoekonomi dan geopolitik, serta kebijakan unilateral yang mengganggu transisi energi. Perdagangan internasional, meski mendorong ekonomi rendah karbon, juga berkontribusi pada krisis iklim. Negara berkembang termasuk Indonesia perlu pendekatan baru untuk menghadapi realitas geopolitik dan transisi hijau yang adil. Pembaruan kesepakatan global tentang pembangunan berkelanjutan termasuk perpanjangan agenda SDGs hingga 2050, penguatan mekanisme antar pemerintah, koherensi kebijakan perdagangan dan investasi, serta pembiayaan SDGs sangat krusial. Untuk memberikan gambaran utuh peluncuran Laporan Perdagangan dan Investasi Berkelanjutan Indonesia, Prospek dan Tantangan Ekonomi Berkelanjutan di tengah Ancaman Fragmentasi Global, kami mengundang Bapak Dandi Rafitrandi, Peneliti Departemen Ekonomi CSIS Indonesia, Rizki, Dosen Universitas Indonesia, Fellow DfD Lab, dan Bapak Habib Abian Zakwan, Peneliti Departemen Hubungan Internasional CSIS Indonesia. Kepada Bapak Dandi kami persilahkan.
Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu sekalian. Sebelumnya saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih pada pagi hari ini. Perkenankan saya di sini Dandi Rafitrandi sebagai peneliti ekonomi Departemen Ekonomi CSIS Indonesia untuk memaparkan kilasan terkait dengan Laporan Perdagangan dan Investasi Berkelanjutan Indonesia tahun 2024. Pada bagian pertama, saya akan menjelaskan beberapa pendahuluan dan penjelasan terkait dengan apa itu DfD Lab dan juga beberapa snapshot atau kilasan terkait dengan laporan yang akan kita luncurkan pada pagi hari ini. Untuk bagian kedua, kita akan mempresentasikan terkait dengan temuan laporan kami. Dan yang ketiga, akan juga presentasikan untuk temuan laporan khusus terkait dengan tata kelola mineral kritis. Mungkin tadi sudah dilihat dari video bahwa memang CSIS Indonesia sekarang sedang memiliki program yang bernama Decarbonization for Development Lab. Itu adalah sebuah program yang membantu mengumpulkan para stakeholders, baik dari akademisi, dari think tank, dari private sectors, dan juga pastinya KL atau juga policy makers, untuk bisa meningkatkan penelitian-penelitian atau kualitas-kualitas penelitian terkait dengan kebijakan iklim. Tentunya CSIS Indonesia di sini memiliki core competence di bidang perdagangan dan industri, sehingga untuk fokus dari DfD Lab adalah perdagangan, industri, dan juga investasi untuk di tahun pertama ini. Jadi kita memiliki 3 pilar terkait dengan apa saja yang kita lakukan di DfD Lab. Ada riset, ada network, dan juga terkait dengan data. Pada pagi hari ini kita akan meluncurkan report atau laporan terkait dengan flagship report, yaitu adalah laporan perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan Indonesia. Dan untuk tahun ini kita ada beberapa inisiatif baru, yaitu terkait dengan call for proposal, DfD Lab Lecture yang nanti pagi akan kita dengarkan, dan juga other flagship report, dan juga peluncuran secara formal DfD Lab Dashboard. Pertanyaan yang mungkin ada di pikiran Bapak Ibu gitu ya, kenapa sih kita ingin memajukan tema terkait dengan perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan? Jawabannya adalah kita memerlukan pendekatan baru. Kita memerlukan pendekatan baru untuk bisa mencapai target-target pemerintah dan juga masyarakat Indonesia. Di antaranya visi Indonesia 2045 dan juga target net zero emission di tahun 2060 kita. Jadi kita memiliki satu laporan secara komprehensif terkait dengan perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan. Dan kita juga buat, mungkin ini bisa dibilang salah satu report yang satu-satunya mungkin ya, yang mengadres terkait dengan mineral kritis di Indonesia, yaitu terkait dengan aspek keberlanjutan dalam tata kelola mineral kritis di Indonesia. Sedikit kilasan report di laporan utama kami, kita melihat bahwa pertumbuhan ekonomi global masih akan dibayangi oleh beberapa downside risk, yaitu adalah inflasi, walaupun mungkin trennya menurun. Yang kedua adalah tensi geopolitik, dan yang ketiga adalah perubahan iklim. Hal-hal ini yang akan kita address dan kita coba lihat bagaimana dampaknya untuk masing-masing, khususnya terkait dengan kinerja perdagangan dan juga investasi, baik di global dan juga di Indonesia. Kita melihat bahwa perdagangan dan investasi luar negeri itu menurun atau melambat. Dan hal ini juga mengekspos salah satu hal yang menurut kami penting, yaitu adalah kesenjangan kinerja antara negara berkembang dan juga negara maju. Di sini kita melihat apa sih sebenarnya potensi baru gitu ya dari terkait dengan perdagangan dan juga investasi. Apabila kita lihat dari data, kita menemukan bahwa pertumbuhan perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan itu meningkat di tahun 2023. Jadi hal ini bisa kita jadikan potensi untuk Indonesia ke depannya dapat memiliki sumber-sumber pertumbuhan baru yang kita inginkan. Tentunya tadi untuk mencapai target-target seperti 2045 dan juga 2060. Namun demikian, masih banyak tantangan yang kita alami. Misalnya, Indonesia memerlukan kebijakan-kebijakan yang menurut kami harusnya lebih fasilitatif, ya, terkait dengan perdagangan dan juga investasi. Hal ini dikarenakan melalui beberapa indikator yang kami kumpulkan bahwa kinerja Indonesia dalam perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan masih lebih rendah di negara tetangga. Hal ini yang harus kita pacu ke depannya. Kita juga mengelakkan bahwa Indonesia sudah memiliki beberapa kebijakan untuk mendukung perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan. Di antaranya di laporan kami meng-highlight adanya taksonomi hijau dan juga pembentukan carbon market yang mungkin akan bisa meningkatkan potensi dari perdagangan dan juga investasi berkelanjutan di masa depan. Untuk kilasan laporan terkait laporan khusus, kami mengambil tema mineral kritis. Mungkin banyak ibu dan bapak yang belum mengetahui apa itu mineral kritis. Kami membahas pembahasan terkait dengan mineral kritis ini di laporan kami secara cukup komprehensif. Mungkin kita spend time mineral kritis dan juga kegunaan khususnya dengan transisi energi. Kita mengetahui bahwa ini merupakan isu yang baru dan ini perlu lebih strategis terkait dengan approach yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah, tentunya dengan mengedepankan konsep global. Kita juga menekankan bahwa penting untuk melakukan diversifikasi investasi. Ini kita temukan pada studi lapangan kami yang kami lakukan di Morowali, yang nanti akan dijelaskan lebih lanjut oleh kolega saya. Yang utama, pemerintah Indonesia untuk menyelesaikan beberapa tumpang tindih regulasi dengan mineral kritis dan juga beberapa wewenang antara pemerintah daerah dan juga pemerintah pusat yang menurut kami masih belum efektif dan efisien. Terakhir, Indonesia juga kami lihat harus lebih aktif dalam forum-forum internasional dan juga perjanjian perdagangan dan juga investasi. Kenapa? Karena dengan mengikuti forum-forum ini dan juga perjanjian, ini akan meningkatkan exposure Indonesia terhadap standar-standar sustainability yang sekarang sedang dilakukan oleh negara-negara lain. Oleh sebab itu, kita melihat bahwa ke depannya mineral kritis ini akan menjadi sektor yang penting. Kita tahu sendiri bahwa Indonesia memiliki kebijakan hilirisasi, ya, dan ini merupakan hal yang perlu kita evaluasi dan juga kita lihat apakah memang semua mineral kritis harus dihilirisasi. Apa sih indikator-indikator yang harus kita gunakan ketika kita berbicara tentang program-program hilirisasi? Mungkin sedikit penjelasan dari kami. Selanjutnya saya akan panggil Rizki untuk dipresentasi bagian selanjutnya.
Terima kasih atas perkenalannya. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Izinkan saya untuk menyampaikan ringkasan singkat dari bagian pertama dari laporan perdagangan dan investasi Indonesia berkelanjutan di Indonesia. Laporan utama ini akan menceritakan tentang prospek dan tantangan ekonomi keberlanjutan di era fragmentasi global. Mari kita mulai dengan kondisi makroekonomi. Jadi saya mohon maaf nih Senin pagi langsung banyak grafik, bear with me. Jadi seperti kita ketahui recovery pasca pandemi sudah kita masuki. Jadi dengan membaiknya kondisi kesehatan masyarakat, kita lihat pertumbuhan global sudah kembali di level 3%, namun rata-rata akan diproyeksikan lebih rendah daripada kondisi di masa sebelum pra-pandemi. Nah, di tengah recovery ini ada banyak tantangan. Yang pertama tentu perubahan demografi, peningkatan teknologi yang bukan hanya substitusi pada human capital, tapi juga complementary terhadap human capital, adanya kelangkaan sumber daya dan perubahan iklim, perubahan geopolitik, serta integrasi maupun disintegrasi dari perdagangan maupun keuangan internasional. Hal ini yang menyebabkan recovery pasca pandemi ini akan menghadapi banyak ketidakpastian dan juga resiko. Seperti halnya di global, Indonesia juga mengalami pemulihan yang sudah cukup baik. Kita sudah sudah kembali ke level pertumbuhan sekitar kurang lebih 5%. Namun pertumbuhan ini sangat didorong oleh konsumsi rumah tangga. Kita bisa lihat rumah tangga ini adalah bar yang warna biru tua, dan di akhir-akhir tahun terakhir ini sangat didorong oleh menjadi kontributor utama dari pertumbuhan Indonesia. Pertanyaannya adalah apakah kita bisa terus mengandalkan konsumsi rumah tangga sebagai kontributor utama dari pertumbuhan Indonesia. Nah, oleh karena itu ada 3 hal yang kami catat untuk memastikan pertumbuhan ekonomi Indonesia untuk keberlanjutannya. Pertama, pemulihan pasca pandemi ini diperlukan untuk dipastikan selalu dengan terus mengintegrasikan keberlanjutan dari reformasi struktural. Kedua, pemanfaatan disrupsi dan teknologi serta SDM untuk melancarkan transformasi struktural ini. Dan yang terakhir adalah kebijakan publik yang inklusif dan mengintegrasikan keberlanjutan pembangunan ekonomi. Pentingnya inklusivitas dan keberlanjutan ini kami pikir sangat penting, dan oleh karena itu kami harap dengan laporan ini kami turut mendorong adanya pembicaraan kebijakan dan pembuatan kebijakan yang inklusif dan berkelanjutan. Selanjutnya mari kita lihat sisi eksternal. Saya akan mulai dengan sisi perdagangan, lalu saya lanjutkan dengan sisi investasi. Kita lihat selama tahun lalu 2023 perdagangan terlihat merambat dengan growth negatif 1,2%, namun diharapkan tahun 2004 dan 2025 akan kembali rebound kembali. Hal ini juga terlihat di perdagangan Indonesia. Kita lihat di tahun 2023 ekspor maupun impor turun. Ekspor turun sebesar 11,4% dan impor turun sebesar 6,6%. Selain itu, seperti Bapak Ibu ketahui, kita sangat tergantung oleh ekspor dari komoditas dan mitra dagang yang masih sangat tradisional, di mana 1/4 dari kita adalah ke Republik Rakyat Tiongkok. Di sisi investasi, seperti juga Dandi tadi sudah sebutkan, ada penurunan tren investasi di pasar global. Memang kalau kita lihat bandingkan antara investasi yang masuk ke pasar negara maju maupun negara berkembang, kita lihat ada peningkatan dari investasi di negara maju. Namun sayangnya untuk negara berkembang, investasi ini cenderung mengalami penurunan dan perlambatan. Bagi Indonesia, perlambatan ini belum begitu terasa. Kita lihat Indonesia adalah yang biru tua dibanding dengan negara-negara tetangga. Kita masih menjadi salah satu sebenarnya adalah destinasi investasi yang paling tinggi, namun kita perlu mewaspadai adanya perlambatan yang terjadi di pasar global ini. Berikutnya saya akan lanjutkan dengan bagaimana kondisi dari khususnya perdagangan environmental goods. Environmental goods ini adalah sekitar 124 pos tarif HS barang. Dia menyumbang 5% perdagangan global saat ini dan pertumbuhannya sangat baik. Dibandingkan dengan yang kita lihat tadi pertumbuhan global mengalami penurunan, justru perdagangan environmental goods ini mengalami pertumbuhan hampir 2,5 kali lipat selama 2 dekade terakhir. Di tahun 2023 pun tumbuhnya sebesar 4%. Jadi sangat kontras dengan pertumbuhan dari barang-barang tradisional yang turun sebesar 1,2%. Selain itu, kalau kita lihat kecenderungan dari sisi perdagangan, policy kebijakan perdagangan, dari segi tarif, kita lihat perdagangan barang environmental goods memiliki tarif yang relatif lebih rendah dibandingkan barang-barang tradisional. Namun bagi negara berkembang kita masih memberlakukan tarif yang cukup tinggi dibandingkan dengan negara maju yang sudah banyak meliberalisasi tarif di perdagangan environmental goods. Kontrasnya, walaupun negara maju seperti sudah sangat liberal, banyak sekali non-tarif measures yang diberlakukan oleh negara maju di perdagangan environmental goods ini. Sehingga jika kita bandingkan kedua hal ini, ini bisa menjadi concern yang sangat besar bagi negara berkembang karena non-tarif measures biasanya lebih tidak transparan dan lebih sulit untuk diikuti oleh negara berkembang. Sehingga negara-negara perlu meningkatkan komitmennya untuk perluasan akses pada environmental goods dengan kebijakan-kebijakan yang lebih fasilitatif. Dari segi perdagangan environmental goods Indonesia, bagaimana peran kita? Ada good news, yaitu ekspornya sangat hampir triple, terutama di antara tahun 2000-an dibandingkan tahun 2022, namun ada perlambatan sedikit di tahun 2023. Dibandingkan dengan negara-negara tetangga, Indonesia adalah di garis biru, biru tua, dibandingkan dengan misalnya yang paling menjadi rising star di negara tetangga adalah Vietnam. Di tahun misalnya 2011, ekspor Vietnam untuk environmental goods itu cuma setengah dari ekspor Indonesia. Namun di tahun 2021, ekspor environmental goods Vietnam sudah 3 kali lipat dari ekspor environmental goods Indonesia. Jadi kalau kita lihat mungkin ini adalah menjadi tantangan yang belum kita, atau opportunity yang belum kita ambil secara optimal untuk sebagai pengungkit baru di perdagangan pola perdagangan Indonesia. Apa Apakah kita tidak bisa melakukan partisipasi ini? Memang indeks kompleksitas Indonesia itu relatif rendah, 112. Namun dibandingkan Vietnam bahkan kita masih lebih tinggi. Ini dari segi ranking. Dan ada potensi kompleksitas hijau adalah potensi untuk ekonomi bisa mendiversifikasi produk dalam bentuk environmental goods yang dia produksi. Potensinya cukup baik, walaupun untuk kondisi sekarang Indonesia masih sangat rendah, ya 60. Grafik ini menunjukkan secara tren indeks dari kompleksitas tersebut dan bisa kita lihat Indonesia yang hijau ini relatif tidak mengalami banyak pertumbuhan dalam kemampuannya untuk memproduksi barang-barang environmental goods ini. Namun dengan besarnya pertumbuhan di pasar global, kita bisa mengambil kesempatan ini sebagai pengungkit baru untuk perdagangan Indonesia. Dari segi investasi, tentu untuk Indonesia sebagai pengguna dan juga produsen dari sektor energi, kita ketahui 34% dari emisi gas rumah kaca terbesar Indonesia itu adalah disumbang oleh sektor energi, di mana 87%-nya adalah khusus oleh bahan baku energi fosil. Dan dengan pertumbuhan yang cukup tinggi yaitu 6,7%. Oleh karena itu Indonesia tentu mempunyai komitmen untuk mencapai target sumber energi terbarukan sebesar 17% by 2025. Namun pada tahun 2023 kita baru 13%. Jadi masih ada gap yang cukup tinggi kalau kita mau raih target yang 2 tahun ini akan, 1 tahun lagi, ini 2024, harus dicapai. Oleh karena itu sudah ada kebijakan atau enggak program yang diambil oleh pemerintah, salah satunya ikut serta dalam Just Energy Transition Partnership yang memberikan sekitar 20 miliar komitmen untuk transisi energi di Indonesia. Diharapkan komitmen ini tentu tidak bisa membayar semua kebutuhan investasi yang diperlukan, namun sekitar 1/1/5 dari total investasi yang diperlukan oleh Indonesia. Nah, ada studi dari CSIS dan Tenggara mengenai resiko dan tantangan dari transformasi energi ini. Salah satunya adalah status quo ketenaga listrikan Indonesia yang dimonopoli PLN, sehingga memberi hambatan besar bagi transisi energi dan memberi hambatan terutama dalam bentuk insentif yang cukup bagi energi baru dan terbarukan untuk bisa berkembang. Oke, selanjutnya bagaimana dari segi financing? Dari segi financing di pasar global juga kalau kita lihat kalau dari sisi PMA ada penurunan, namun di pasar global untuk green bonds justru mengalami kenaikan. Jadi kita lihat baik di perdagangan maupun investasi, sektor environmental goods dan environmental financing itu lebih bergairah dibandingkan yang tradisional. Pasar green bond global tumbuh hampir 4 kali lipat antara 2018 ke 2021. Di Indonesia sendiri, pasar obligasi ramah lingkungan tumbuh 3,7 kali lipat pada periode yang sama, jadi juga cukup aktif. Namun tentu masih banyak yang room for space, there is big space for improvement, karena mayoritasnya masih dikuasai oleh pemerintah, dilakukan oleh pemerintah maupun BUMN. Another good thing adalah kita sudah memiliki taksonomi hijau yang diterbitkan oleh OJK dan harus wajib dilaksanakan mulai tahun 2024 ini. Jadi diharapkan green financing bukan hanya dari sisi bond, tapi juga mungkin akan bisa berlanjut di sisi banking. Last but not least, kami merasa perlu untuk membahas juga industrial policy yang Indonesia lakukan. Salah satu industrial policy yang sangat masif dilakukan di Indonesia adalah penetapan tingkat kandungan dalam negeri. Dan sektor energi tidak imun dari itu, jadi merupakan sektor energi yang terbarukan terkena cukup dampak yang besar dari kebijakan TKDN ini. Dan banyak selain itu TKDN ini banyak studi yang menunjukkan bahwa pertama belum efektif dalam meningkatkan permintaan produknya, kedua menjadi bahan untuk masuknya teknologi yang diperlukan untuk mengganti teknologi yang lebih baik, sehingga merugikan daya saing, dan berkorelasi negatif dengan produktivitas, output, ekspor, tenaga kerja, dan nilai tambah perusahaan. Sehingga kami regulasi TKDN ini perlu direformasi dan diharmonisasi dengan kebijakan perdagangan dan industri, mengingat pentingnya integrasi rantai pasokan global untuk memudahkan kita juga melakukan energy transition. Sederhanaan proses aplikasi juga dirasakan perlu, dan kami turut mengapresiasi adanya kemungkinan perubahan pada TKDN untuk solar cell yang baru diumumkan pada bulan Mei kemarin. Last but not least, jadi kami ingin juga regulasi dan peraturan terkait perdagangan di dalam hal carbon pricing. Jadi penetapan harga karbon ini tentu penting di seluruh dunia untuk menginternalisasi cost dari karbon ke dalam consumption decision maupun production decision. Nah, namun tentu ada resiko dari carbon leakage dari perbedaan mungkin harga karbon di antar dunia dan juga perbedaan komitmen. Nah, despite all this, walaupun dengan ketentuan ini, namun kita bisa lihat di pasar global, cakupan efek emisi rumah kaca cukup besar, 23% dari efek rumah kaca tergabung dalam atau merupakan bagian dari penetapan harga karbon, setengahnya melalui ETS, setengahnya melalui pajak karbon, jadi cukup banyak perkembangan. Namun yang ingin kami sampaikan juga dan kami rasa penting adalah pentingnya Indonesia untuk turut andil dalam kerjasama internasional terkait upaya dekarbonasi ekonomi ini. Ada banyak sekali manfaat dari turut andilnya Indonesia dan keaktifan Indonesia. Dan walaupun Indonesia sudah cukup ada seperti tadi ikut Just Energy Transition Participation, namun kami rasa masih banyak fora ekonomi keberlanjutan yang bisa kita ikuti untuk dua hal. Pertama, membantu Indonesia menjadi tegas pada langkah-langkah di dalam domestik untuk memenuhi komitmen iklimnya. Kedua, kita ini juga, dengan kita makin berpartisipasi, maka perspektif Indonesia pun lebih dapat diterwakilkan dalam harmonisasi kebijakan perdagangan ekonomi kelanjutan. Mungkin dari saya segitu, saya akan lanjutkan ke Habib yang akan menjelaskan tentang khusus dari ini.
Terima kasih rekan saya Kiki. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu sekalian. Saya akan melanjutkan pembahasan mengenai mineral kritis. Mungkin Bapak dan Ibu sekalian bertanya-tanya kenapa kita menggunakan istilah mineral kritis dibandingkan dengan berbagai macam istilah yang lain yang ada. Mungkin misalnya transition minerals atau minerals biasa. Itu karena dalam bayangan kami bahwa karena memang isunya mineral kritis, karena jumlah sumber dayanya terbatas, karena fungsinya sangat strategis. Oleh karena itu, kita harus menerapkan standar lingkungan yang paling tinggi dalam rangka menjaga supaya ada keberlanjutan daripada penggunaannya dan juga bagaimana kita melindungi dan melibatkan. Jadi kita tidak bisa hanya menyerahkan kepada satu stakeholder saja untuk memastikan penggunaannya itu bersifat strategis. Oleh karena itu, kita menggunakan istilah mineral kritis. Mungkin saya langsung masuk kepada situasinya itu seperti apa sih di Indonesia gitu ya. Kalau misalnya kita lihat di sini ada beberapa aspek yang mendasari kenapa suatu mineral itu menjadi kritis gitu ya. Yang pertama mungkin kita bisa lihat kebermanfaatannya. Kebermanfaatan mineral itu sendiri bisa menjadi bahan baku untuk produk teknologi berkelanjutan, bisa juga menjadi bahan baku untuk teknologi tinggi seperti semikonduktor, atau bahkan bahan baku untuk teknologi pertahanan. Jadi fungsinya itu sangat kritis gitu ya, sangat strategis. Dan juga ada aspek berikutnya adalah keterbatasan. Nah, keterbatasan di sini artinya apa? Artinya adalah situasi pengambilan atau lokasi tempat sumber dayanya ini sendiri ada di wilayah-wilayah yang mungkin sulit untuk diakses. Salah satu contohnya yang baru-baru ini mungkin diterbitkan oleh Financial Times, bagaimana lokasi mineral kritis itu ada di dalam gunung berapi gitu ya, di dalam magma. Nah, kemudian ada juga di negara-negara yang mungkin kapasitas finansialnya terbatas untuk melakukan eksplorasi ataupun eksploitasi. Kemudian juga ada di bawah laut atau di dasar laut gitu ya. Dan yang terakhir ada juga di wilayah konflik. Jadi berbagai macam situasi yang ada ini. Kemudian ada juga aspek ketergantungan. Artinya apa? Bahwa mineral ini sangat bergantung kepada perkembangan teknologi. Dengan perkembangan teknologi yang semakin maju, bisa jadi mineralnya itu semakin cepat habis, atau juga bisa tergantikan relevansinya dengan mineral yang lainnya. Nah, kita pernah belajar dari pengalaman kita di tahun 1980 terkait dengan kayu gelondongan. Jadi kalau misalnya kita tidak memperhatikan situasi seperti ini, kita bisa kehilangan daya saing dari produk unggulan kita. Kemudian yang terakhir adalah aspek ketahanan. Resiliensi dari apa? Karena sekarang situasinya rantai pasok mineral di tingkat global itu sangat dipengaruhi juga oleh situasi geopolitik. Baik itu friendshoring, nearshoring, ataupun reshoring. negara-negara maju terutama itu berkeinginan untuk menarik kembali rantai pasoknya atau memastikan. Jadi bukan lagi logika efisiensi, tetapi sekarang logika resiliensi atau logika juga seberapa jauh like-mindedness seperti itu ya. Nah ini di sini disebutkan dalam neraca Kementerian SDM kita memiliki 46 mineral. Jadi di situ ada pembagiannya, jenis-jenisnya ada logam, ada bukan logam jenis tertentu. Tetapi yang mau kami tekankan di sini adalah bahwa 46 mineral yang disampaikan oleh Kementerian SDM tidak semuanya kita bersifat kritis gitu ya. Jadi ada mineral-mineral yang tidak bersifat kritis dan ada juga mineral kritis yang sebenarnya kita tidak punya. Indonesia tidak punya. Contohnya apa? Contohnya germanium yang merupakan bahan baku semikonduktor ataupun juga lithium, bagian dari komplementer baterai kendaraan listrik. Di sini kita mengangkat 5 mineral yang ditetapkan oleh Indonesia sebagai mineral kritis, tetapi juga oleh dunia dilihat sebagai mineral kritis. Di antaranya adalah nikel, kobalt, tembaga, bauksit, dan timah. Nah, di sini kita memperhatikan bagaimana produksi dan cadangan Indonesia dibandingkan dengan produksi dan cadangan di dunia. Tentu kita menggunakan satu data rujukan yaitu USGS Mineral Commodity Summaries mengingat komprehensifnya data tersebut. Nah, kemudian yang mau kami bahas di sini ada 3. Yang pertama, yang mungkin Bapak Ibu sering kali baca di laporan-laporan ataupun di berita adalah nikel. Situasi nikel Indonesia itu seperti apa? Pada tahun 2022 Indonesia menempati posisi kedua sebagai produsen terbesar di dunia. Tapi pada tahun 2023 kita naik menjadi produsen terbesar nikel di dunia. Nah, dibandingkan dengan cadangan-cadangan di negara lain, kita juga memiliki cadangan porsi yang sangat besar, 42%, sangat signifikan kalau misalnya kita lihat gitu ya. Dan kalau misalnya kita lihat bagaimana situasinya di negara-negara ASEAN, apakah nikel itu hanya dimiliki oleh Indonesia atau enggak? Ada juga negara lain, tapi porsinya itu tidak sebanyak yang Indonesia miliki. Artinya apa? Dalam hal ini sebenarnya nikel memang memungkinkan kita, bukan memungkinkan, bahkan memberikan kita keunggulan apabila kita hendak menggunakannya secara strategis. Kemudian ada juga kobalt. Nah, kobalt ini kita menempati posisi kedua ya, terbesar di dunia dari segi produksinya. Nah, cadangan kobalt Indonesia tapi tidak begitu banyak, artinya hanya bersifat kurang dari 5%, tetapi kita mengalami peningkatan produksi dari tahun 2022 sampai dengan tahun 2023. Lagi-lagi kita melihat juga apakah ada di negara ASEAN lain yang juga memiliki kobalt. Di sini ada Filipina. Nah, yang ketiga itu adalah timah. Timah ini juga menjadi salah satu komponen yang sangat penting. Kalau misalnya Bapak Ibu di sini pasti menggunakan perangkat telepon ya, Apple ataupun Samsung. Nah, jadi yang perlu kita pelajari adalah timah itu satu dari 4 mineral kritis yang digunakan untuk telepon genggam. Tin, tungsten, tantalum, dan emas. Nah, tin itu adalah timah gitu ya. Jadi ini timah Indonesia sendiri sudah masuk ke dalam rantai pasok global, itu dari Apple ataupun juga China Mobile misalnya. Nah, tapi sayangnya karena berbagai macam isu, terutama korupsi, tata kelola yang kurang baik, produksi timah di Indonesia itu mengalami penurunan dan posisinya juga mengikut turun gitu ya, dari posisi 2 kemudian menjadi posisi ketiga di dunia untuk dari segi produksinya. Nah, berikutnya kita juga membahas mengenai bauksit dan tembaga. Ini yang rasanya Indonesia tidak begitu banyak keunggulan relatifnya atau keunggulan komparatifnya dibandingkan dengan 3 mineral kritis lainnya. Karena banyak negara lain di dunia dan bahkan di negara-negara ASEAN juga yang memiliki sumber daya jauh lebih banyak dibandingkan kita. Ini misalnya ada bauksit, itu produksinya menurun, kalau misalnya kita bandingkan kontribusinya terhadap angka di dunia dari 5,3% menjadi 5%, dan angka cadangan bauksit kita juga relatif terbatas, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Hanya 3% dibandingkan negara-negara lain di dunia. Kemudian ada juga tembaga, sama kasusnya, mengalami penurunan produksi. Nah, yang kita ingin lihat juga adalah sebenarnya apa sih yang sudah dilakukan oleh Indonesia dalam mengelola 5 mineral tersebut. Kita tahu ada yang namanya kebijakan hilirisasi, tetapi yang perlu ditekankan adalah idealnya hilirisasi tidak hanya berfokus kepada tujuan akhir, tidak hanya berfokus kepada ends, tetapi juga berfokus kepada means, cara-cara untuk menghasilkan produk berkelanjutan tersebut. Jadi cara-caranya itu juga harus ramah lingkungan, kemudian memperhatikan misalnya emisi gas rumah kacanya dan lain sebagainya. Nah, sejauh ini kita melihat bahwa yang sudah sangat maju hanya pada sektor kendaraan listrik, tetapi untuk produk-produk berkelanjutan lainnya tampak kita belum berfokus gitu ya. Nanti ini kita bisa bahas, tetapi lagi-lagi belum ada insentif bagi praktik pengelolaan mineral kritis yang lebih ramah lingkungan ataupun juga memperhatikan gas rumah kacanya seperti itu. Jadi tidak ada salahnya untuk kita mengelola dan memanfaatkan mineral kritis yang kita miliki, tetapi cara-cara yang dilakukan perlu memperhatikan standar internasional ataupun juga kepentingan lingkungan, kepentingan keberlanjutan itu sendiri. Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya mau membahas sedikit terkait dengan bagaimana pemangku kepentingan yang ada di rantai mineral, rantai pasok mineral di Indonesia. Jadi ada 3 lapis bagaimana kita memperhatikan tata kelola mineral kritis di Indonesia. Pertama, bahwa pemerintah itu tidak bisa dilihat sebagai aktor tunggal. Jadi ada pemerintah pusat dan ada pemerintah daerah. Tentunya UU Minerba yang tahun 2009 itu membagi kewenangan antara pemerintah pusat dan pemerintah daerah. Tetapi setelah adanya UU yang terbaru 3 tahun 2020, bagaimana terjadi resentralisasi. Tetapi lagi-lagi pemerintah daerah sebenarnya yang melakukan pengawasan di sana. Jadi kapasitas pengawasan, kapasitas juga untuk memahami situasi mineral kritis yang ada di daerah itu menjadi penting. Penting untuk dibayangkan apa yang daerah tersebut akan lakukan ketika misalnya mineralnya habis. Seperti itu. Itu yang sampai sekarang belum kita lihat ada. Nah, kemudian yang kedua adalah bagaimana di tingkat pusat sendiri ada distribusi kewenangan di setiap kementerian. Kalau misalnya orientasi kita adalah membangun rantai pasok, tetapi berarti kita harus memiliki koordinasi atau koherensi dalam pengambilan kebijakan dari hulu sampai ke hilir. Hal ini yang belum kita lihat ada juga. Nah, kemudian yang terakhir adalah bagaimana memposisikan pemerintah sebagai hanya satu aktor di tengah berbagai macam aktor-aktor lain, termasuk misalnya think tank ataupun industri, kemudian institusi keuangan dan lain sebagainya. Nah, yang kita mau lihat di sini, ini misalnya kalau kita bayangkan mulai dari investasi sampai dengan daur ulang gitu ya, bagaimana suatu rantai pasok mineral kritis itu dibayangkan, memang tidak semua kementerian dilibatkan seperti itu. Dan misalnya penyelidik atau penyidik tambang, inspektur tambang itu bagaimana misalnya kewenangannya hanya terbatas pada tambang saja. Kemudian juga ada pengawas lingkungan, misalnya hanya terbatas kepada isu lingkungan saja. Tetapi bagaimana memastikan bahwa setiap penegakan hukum di Indonesia itu memiliki orientasi rantai pasok supaya menciptakan rantai pasok mineral kritis yang berkelanjutan. Nah, kemudian ini saya mau cerita sedikit, Bapak Ibu. Saya turun lapangan ke Morowali. Saya mau cerita setelah pulang dari Morowali, 1 minggu saya mengalami ISPA. Jadi saya suaranya habis, kemudian batuk-batuk, bagaimana menggambarkan buruknya air atau udara di sana gitu ya. Dan juga misalnya kita tahu, kita mendengar cerita dari teman-teman di sana bahwa kalau misalnya mau makan itu harus ngelap dulu piringnya. Karena misalnya debunya itu betapa masifnya, kemudian juga kita melakukan kunjungan ke salah satu muara sungai di Bahadopi, letaknya kurang lebih 10 km dari pusat industrinya. Dan itu di situ kita lihat bagaimana misalnya warna airnya itu sudah tercemar, bukan lagi warna coklat tetapi kemerahan, yang artinya ada mungkin gabungan senyawa kimia di dalam larutan air tersebut. Dan ini dialami oleh masyarakat lokal di Morowali itu sendiri. Morowali sebelum terjadi kawasan industri penduduknya ada 100.000, tetapi ketika sudah ada kawasan industrinya menaik jadi sampai 200 sampai 300.000. Dan rencananya sedang dibangun juga satu kawasan industri baru yang akan sama besarnya atau bahkan lebih besar dari sana. Jadi kita bisa bayangkan betapa luasnya dampak lingkungan yang akan terjadi di Morowali. Di sini saya mau balik ke sini sedikit. Ada perbedaan standar lingkungan yang kami perhatikan dan kami juga dapatkan dari lapangan antara misalnya kawasan industri yang perusahaannya berafiliasi dengan Tiongkok, Kanada dan juga Australia. Kanada menjadi champion untuk penegakan praktik-praktik yang ramah lingkungan, terutama di bidang mineral. Kemudian ada Australia yang misalnya perusahaannya baru saja membeli perusahaan mineral Indonesia dan menggantinya menjadi boardnya itu lebih ramah lingkungan, lebih perhatian kepada isu-isu lingkungan termasuk satwa dan lain sebagainya. Kemudian Tiongkok sendiri kita perlu mendorong agar perusahaan-perusahaan Tiongkok lebih ramah lingkungan seperti itu. Nah, berikutnya Ini kami juga melakukan perbandingan Bapak Ibu sekalian dengan negara-negara lain, pertama dengan Kanada, kemudian dengan Australia dan juga dengan Inggris. Kami tahu bahwa negara-negara ini memiliki standar lingkungan yang relatif tinggi seperti itu, dan tapi pun juga dengan standar lingkungan yang relatif tinggi, mereka visinya berbeda-beda. Misalnya Kanada memiliki visi untuk menjadikan kekuatan praktik industri yang berkelanjutan. Kekuatan praktik industri berkelanjutan artinya apa? Artinya mempertimbangkan isu terkait dengan transportasinya, logistiknya harus ramah lingkungan, kemudian juga pembangkit listriknya juga harus ramah lingkungan dan lain sebagainya. Australia memiliki visi untuk menjadi renewable energy superpower. Jadi memang fokusnya adalah bagaimana menciptakan sebanyak mungkin produk-produk pembangkit listrik yang berkelanjutan. Inggris memiliki visi menjadi responsible mineral financing, pusat pembiayaan mineral yang berkelanjutan dan juga scientific power. Ini yang semuanya disampaikan dalam critical mineral strateginya masing-masing negara ini. Jadi semakin ke kanan atau misalnya semakin ke Kanada itu semakin komprehensif. Jadi benar-benar setiap rantai pasok itu dipertimbangkan elemen keberlanjutannya sendiri. Jadi poin besarnya adalah kepemilikan mineral kritis itu nggak bisa lagi kita jadikan jualan ke negara-negara lain. Oh ya, kita punya mineral kritis. Karena banyak negara di dunia ini juga memiliki mineral kritis. Dan mereka juga lebih memperhatikan isu lingkungan. Jadi menerapkan praktik lingkungan ataupun instrumen yang jauh lebih tinggi dibandingkan kita. Dan itu memiliki daya jual yang lebih dibandingkan hanya menawarkan, oh kita punya mineral, seperti itu ya. Ini yang terakhir terkait dengan peluang, ini kerjasama untuk tata kelola mineral kritis, ini peluang dan tantangan yang Indonesia miliki. Indonesia sudah melakukan kesepakatan perdagangan dengan banyak negara tentunya, tetapi belum semua kesepakatan perdagangan itu mencakup isu mineral kritis gitu ya, terutama yang sudah disepakati sebelum-sebelumnya. Nah, kita lihat salah satu contohnya adalah IACEPA gitu ya. Bagaimana Indonesia dan Australia itu sudah membahas secara mendalam terkait dengan ekosistem kendaraan listrik, tapi juga harapannya ke depan untuk semua kesepakatan perdagangan yang akan dilakukan oleh Indonesia memasukkan mineral kritis yang berkelanjutan. Nah, kemudian juga ada inisiatif geoekonomi, itu Mineral Security Partnership yang digagas oleh negara-negara G7, kemudian juga Indo-Pacific Economic Framework yang juga digagas oleh Amerika Serikat. Hal ini sebenarnya memberikan insentif bagi Indonesia untuk lebih patuh atau untuk memiliki referensi terkait dengan rantai pasok yang berkelanjutan. Institusi keuangan internasional pun sama. Jadi ada fasilitas-fasilitas yang ditawarkan untuk bagi negara berkembang atau bagi negara pemilik mineral untuk mengikuti standar berkelanjutan gitu ya. RISE, kemudian juga Climate Smart Mining, kemudian Climate Smart Mining Initiative dan lain sebagainya. Tantangannya apa? Tantangannya ada 3. Yang kalau misalnya berdasarkan laporan ini kita tulis, yang pertama adalah rivalitas antara Amerika Serikat dan Tiongkok atau kekuatan besar ya. Jadi bagaimana kita melihat bahwa rivalitas yang ada salah satunya menentukan derajat akses pasar dan daya saing yang produk-produk Indonesia yang kita miliki, tapi juga sekarang carrot-nya itu semakin kecil. Insentifnya itu yang ditawarkan oleh negara-negara besar ini semakin kecil, tetapi stick-nya semakin besar. Artinya lebih banyak demand kayak untuk misalnya menjauhi Tiongkok ataupun juga misalnya untuk lebih ramah lingkungan dan lain sebagainya. Tetapi insentif yang ditawarkan juga terbatas. Jadi hanya meminta tetapi tidak menawarkan solusi seperti itu. Kemudian yang kedua adalah penyusunan strategi multisektor. Tadi kita lihat bagaimana fragmented daripada rantai pasok kita sendiri. Nah, ada banyak standar yang sudah ditawarkan oleh internasional mulai dari OECD, bagaimana due diligence dilakukan, kemudian Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative dan juga dari MSP itu sendiri. Dari berbagai macam standar ini yang harusnya idealnya Indonesia lakukan adalah tidak lagi membuat standar baru yang kita belum bisa memastikan akses pasarnya di tingkat internasional. Kita perlu memastikan bahwa semua standar itu pilih standar yang paling tinggi dan agar kita bisa patuhi supaya kita bisa lebih jelas akses pasarnya ke arah sana. Kemudian yang terakhir adalah sejauh mana Indonesia juga bisa berlaku sebagai promotor daripada mineral berkelanjutan ini. Indonesia akan menjadi negara perekonomian terbesar keempat di dunia dalam beberapa dekade berikutnya. Indonesia sudah memiliki Indonesian Aid, Indonesia memiliki platform kerjasama Selatan-Selatan, Indonesia memberikan bantuan teknis kepada Afghanistan dan juga Tanzania Untuk sektor pertambangan, nah sejauh mana kita juga memasukkan norma-norma berkelanjutan di dalam setiap inisiatif yang Indonesia miliki. Mungkin itu saja dari saya, demikian, terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih Bapak Dandi, Ibu Kiki, dan Bapak Habib atas peluncuran laporan perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan Indonesia, prospek dan tantangan ekonomi keberlanjutan di tengah ancaman fragmentasi global. Kami mengundang seluruh hadirin untuk memindai QR Code yang ditampilkan di depan untuk mendownload laporan perdagangan dan investasi berkelanjutan Indonesia yang dibahas di tadi, mungkin beberapa menit untuk mendownload. Karena kita ada waktu sebelum sesi kedua, kami buka untuk Q&A 1 atau 2 question dari audience. Mungkin kalau ada yang ingin bertanya kepada Bapak Dandi, Ibu Kiki, dan Bapak Habib, boleh dibantu dengan tim. Kalau mungkin ada yang punya pertanyaan dari audience, ya 1 di sini, dan mungkin 1 lagi dari sebelah sini kalau ada. Ya 1 lagi, jadi ada 2.
Ya, perkenalkan nama saya Akbar Halyonugroho dari Universitas Indonesia. Yang ingin saya tanyakan adalah mengapa tadi dilihat dari data-data yang ada itu, mengapa sampai saat ini bauran energi kita itu masih didominasi oleh energi fosil. Terbaukannya hanya energi fosil 87%, itu menurut saya sangat tertinggal jauh dari negara-negara maju yang ada di dunia. Terima kasih.
Dan 1 pertanyaan lagi di Bapak ini.
Oke, makasih. Nama saya Johansson, saya dari Kadin Indonesia ya. Dari paparan tadi ya, istilahnya itu saya pikir udah bagus ya mengenai kondisi mineral di Indonesia. Tapi ada suatu pertanyaan ke depan ya. Kalau tadi lihat grafik kenaikan ya. Indonesia ini problemnya bukan cuman masalah bagaimana sistem ini berjalan baik ya. Kadang-kadang apa yang sudah dipaparkan dengan politik will di Indonesia itu bertolak belakang. Yang kedua ya, ini sekarang yang jadi masalah di Asia Tenggara ini masalah logistik ya. Kita bicara ekspor, import, ini barang ini mineral-mineral kita itu nantinya kedepannya seperti apa itu perlu disinggung juga mengenai logistik. Karena apa? Ke depan kita kan punya target ini harus naik terus derajatnya lah naik terus, tapi harus dipikirkan juga hambatan-hambatannya gitu. Kalau tadi tidak banyak disinggung mengenai hambatan yang terjadi, kita lihat cuman ada kemungkinan kenaikan itu akan jalan terus, tapi hambatan itu banyak. Di Indonesia yang hambatan paling besar adalah 1 politik will, yang kedua itu masalah logistik, yang 3 adalah masalah perizinan ya. Kalau kita mau mengundang investasi untuk pengembangan yang tadi sudah dipaparkan itu kan perlu investasi besar ya. Itu juga perlu dipikirkan juga. Standar tadi kalau dikatakan standar, tapi sebenarnya bagaimana ada keamanan bagi investor untuk investasi di Indonesia. Itu aja.
Terima kasih Bapak. Dari Pak Habib, baik.
Terima kasih banyak Bapak untuk masukan dan juga pertanyaannya. Saya mungkin mau mencoba menjawab yang pertanyaan renewable energy bauran. Itu sejauh mana gitu ya. Isu terbesar yang kita hadapi sebagai kondisi masyarakat negara berkembang adalah affordability. Masalah keterjangkauan gitu ya. Memang bahwa energi fosil saat ini masih relatif lebih murah dibandingkan dengan energi-energi terbarukan. Tetapi memang seiring dengan peningkatan produksi dan juga bagaimana seiring dengan perkembangan teknologi, itu memang ada penurunan dan juga ditambah dengan subsidi yang diberikan oleh pemerintah sehingga fosil energi ini sendiri itu menjadi dominan. Nah, kedepannya memang yang kita bayangkan dan kita targetkan daripada laporan ini dan laporan dekarbonisasi ekonomi adalah supaya menggerakkan subsidi itu dari fosil energi menjadi subsidi di tahapan renewable energy sendiri. Dan kalau misalnya kita lihat memang hampir semua perangkat yang kita gunakan itu masih bahan bakunya atau bahan bakarnya adalah fosil energi. Belum bahan bakar renewable energy itu belum mampu untuk menggerakkan semua perangkat yang kita pakai gitu ya. Itu mungkin jawabannya terkait dengan affordability dan juga political will juga setuju. Nah, kemudian yang berkaitan dengan masalah logistik, Bapak betul setuju bagaimana kita harus memikirkan tantangan dari logistik rantai pasok mineral. Oleh karenanya kita yang membayangkan Kanada sebagai contoh praktik baik. Karena Kanada memang memikirkan dari segi tata kelola, good governance untuk perizinan sampai dengan bagaimana isu bahan bakar daripada transportasi membawa mineral itu sendiri. Jadi makanya kita tuliskan dalam laporan ini dan kami mengundang Bapak juga untuk baca laporannya dan harapannya ke depan bisa tingkatkan. Memang kalau misalnya kita tidak perbaiki, itu memang tetap akan ada investor yang datang ke Indonesia, saya setuju, tetapi bukan investor yang berkualitas. Nah, tujuan daripada laporan ini juga agar Indonesia mendapatkan investasi mineral yang lebih berkualitas tinggi. Karena kalau misalnya kita tidak melakukan perbaikan tetap akan ada investor yang masuk, tetapi resikonya adalah ketergantungan terhadap investor tersebut. Jadi kita tidak lagi bisa mendapatkan investasi yang lain. Harapannya itu. Semoga menjawab. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih banyak Bapak Habib. Dan selanjutnya kita ada tea dan coffee break selama kurang lebih 10 menit. Kemudian dilanjutkan dengan sesi kedua acara hari ini, yaitu DfD Lab Lecture and in conversation with Jeffrey Sachs, the Summit of Future of United Nations 2.0. Sampai jumpa kembali di sini pada pukul 10.40. Terima kasih. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Decarbonization for Development, DfD Lab Lecture, and in conversation with Jeffrey Sachs. The Summit of the Future, a vision for the United Nations 2.0. Achieving global decarbonization and a just energy transition is essential for reaching net zero emissions and sustainable development. Effective climate policies need strong, evidence-based research, particularly in today's complex geopolitical landscape. Trade restrictions and discriminatory subsidies, like in the US-China electric vehicle, complicate this transition. International trade promotes a low-carbon economy through technology transfer, but can also increase emissions and cause carbon leakages. Developing nations require unique solutions to balance economic growth and climate action. Extending the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, to 2050 and reforming the UN system are crucial for aligning international efforts on sustainable development and financing. And who could be better to talk about all these issues than our guest of
Excellencies, esteemed guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. On behalf of CSIS, I would like to welcome you to this event, the launching of our DfD Lab report on the sustainable trade and investment, and also the lecture, DfD Lab lectures with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. I would like also to extend my warm welcome to Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who already agreed to come here and then to participate in our events. This is really an honor for us to have you here. Although perhaps this is not your first time to be at CSIS for sure. If I recall correctly, this is the third time, your third time, Jeff, to be here and then to deliver lecture, to deliver speech at CSIS. But today is quite special because earlier this morning, we had launched a CSIS annual report on sustainable trade and investment. That highlight issues related to transition towards green economy in Indonesia and also in the regions, especially related to international trade, investments, and supply chains. A little bit backgrounds on that. CSIS started to pay more attention on climate issues since around 5 years ago by setting up our CSIS Climate Policy Unit, and later on also have some initiatives such as the DfD Lab, Decarbonization for Development Lab, that try to engage more on the discussion, on the public discourse related to the climate change, climate policy, and also to the impact on our society. We think the climate issues have become a dominant strategic issues in which international policy would determine how we respond to the challenge. And since CSIS, one word in CSIS name is strategic, we need to deal more on these very important issues as well. Our climate unit has been taking part actively in the discourse about climate and sustainable issues. And since the CSIS comparative advantage core competence is on international perspective, international challenges, we give more weight on the international aspects of climate policy as well in our analysis and our discussions. We focus more on how Indonesia and also the region should respond to the climate change, and how Indonesia especially may take a bigger role in the global response to fight the climate change. And the report launched today is one of our efforts to that objective, one of our initiative in order to contribute more in the discussions. So we are very fortunate actually that Professor Sachs is taking time to deliver speech in these events. As we all know, Professor Jeffrey Sachs is a well-known champion on sustainable development. He has numerous initiatives, and most of these initiatives have been integrated to many global platforms, including also in the UN Initiative of Sustainable Development Goals. I believe in his speech, Professor Sachs will discuss on the need to accelerate our efforts to fight climate change, in addition to many other challenges that we are facing today. I hope Professor Sachs would also discuss how Indonesia can take more active participations in the global initiative I wish you all a good discussion today, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Yose, for your opening remarks. Now I'd like to invite Professor Jeffrey Sachs to deliver his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you for having me back again, and with so many friends. It's a relief that you invite me back. So I know at least I passed some threshold last time that you didn't say never again. So it's really a pleasure and great to see all of you, and thank you for the chance to have a very good and timely discussion about the state of the world and the state of sustainable development. And we are at a very important juncture. We have your political transition of a new government coming in. We have our mess in the United States. For those of you who watched the debate, well, there are no winners, there are only losers. This is not a good situation. And we have a very complicated world. And the world has gotten more complicated and dangerous in recent years. And I think the purpose of our discussion today is to sort out what's happening and what might happen for the good. And I want to spend some time on an important conference, I hope it's important, that will take place in September at the UN, September 22, 23, a summit of world leaders called the Summit of the Future, which is a meeting that was called for by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to try to take stock of where we are, especially in the multilateral system, and what we should be doing to form the system, fix it, strengthen it so that it can really solve the global problems. So we don't have many summits of the future. This is the only one that I know of that we have called. Governments are now negotiating a global pact for the future, which should be the outcome document. And interestingly, there's rising, I would say, a rising call for something real to come out of this. There was an initial draft that was very bland for this pact put together mainly by Germany. And you can imagine Germany with the war in Ukraine, with the difficult politics in Europe right now, had other things on its mind. So they and their counterpart, Namibia, the two co-facilitators of this meeting, put out a first draft, and it was awful, actually. It was very weak and very bland. And a lot of governments said, no, we want a summit really about the future, not a bunch of completely boring paragraphs. And so maybe something more interesting is happening right now. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what should happen, at least, what think tanks like CSIS and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and others should be pushing for. I think more and more, by the way, that the intellectual leadership from think tanks and universities has always been important, but I think it's more important than ever. We don't have, well, I'm speaking as from the US perspective, we don't have any thinking coming from our government right now. We have actions that are pretty destabilizing, actually, but we don't have thought leadership. And so if we're going to have thought leadership, it better come from think tanks, it better come from universities, it better come from people who are assigned the job at least of thinking, not running for office or not doing other things, but really thinking about the future. So I think it's a kind of responsibility for us, and I don't think it's a task. Governments need the thinking. They need the help. The agenda is quite complicated right now. So what is the source of the complications? We're in, obviously, a very rapidly changing world. Some things for the very good, some things for the very bad, some things simply disruptive. We don't know whether it's good or bad, but the change is extremely rapid. Let me start with a few obvious points. The world economy is changing very rapidly, and in some places, especially in East Asia, including here, broadly changing for the good. There's a lot of economic development that is actually taking place. The single most important economic development on a world scale is China's transformation over the last 40 years, and it has changed China and it's changed the world in very important ways. But China's not a lot of that is China's development, but not only China's development. Obviously, that economic change is also creating fundamental geopolitical change. And we are in the middle of the end of a very long era, an era of the Western ascendancy. And the Western ascendancy, I think, meaning the dominant role of the North Atlantic region, Western Europe, and the European imperial powers, and the United States, is a many centuries story, of course. And it is at least 250 years old of European imperial power in this region and in Asia and in Africa. And it's coming to an end in a quite rapid and decisive way now. Of course, the imperial period came to an end just after World War II, and Indonesia was one of the leaders of that. So in a way, this is an old story. But the end of European imperialism at the end of World War II was replaced by US geopolitical dominance from roughly 1950 onward, and that's coming to an end also. And that's what we're really living through right now. The US is still a powerful country, to be sure, and it's militarily, economically, financially, technologically powerful, but it is absolutely no longer dominant. This is quite obvious. And so we're in a new geopolitical era that is very unstable, very conflictual, very quickly changing, and really at the core of a lot of our problems and at the core of the wars that we're engaged in as well. In my view, these are wars that reflect the changing political balance. The war in Ukraine is basically a war in which Russia is saying no more US expansion into our region. And that's not something that Russia was in any position to limit 30 years ago, but it is absolutely in a position to stop it today. And that is what is happening. The war in Israel and Gaza, of course, is a very long story, but it's also going to end up, in my view, with a changing geopolitics where the Arab countries are going to have more power and more say, and where there will be a Palestinian state that is part of the United Nations soon, actually, over the opposition of the US and Israel. And that, I believe, will happen quickly, and it will also be another part of this change that is underway. So we're really at a geopolitical phase that is, I think, right to say the end of roughly 250 years of North Atlantic dominance. And we know from previous moments of historical change, such as the rise of European dominance, that these are often very violent periods in world history. And we have the famous metaphor of the Thucydides trap of what happens when a rising power like China meets an incumbent power like the United States. Does that lead to war? And the answer is it can, and it needs to be prevented in this case, because this is the first time we have a Thucydides trap in the nuclear age. So we're not in the kind of historical experience of the past when even major wars came and went and somehow the world carried on. We're really in a much more existential challenge right now, which is that we have superpowers that can destroy the world by fighting each other, and it's extraordinarily dangerous. And I should add, by the way, the Ukraine war is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between the United States and Russia. That's very bad because there are 6,000 nuclear warheads on each side. And every day now, there's talk of nuclear war. I think by people who are mad. That means my government officials and government officials on the other side who don't understand that this is not only bluster that should be avoided, but a threat to our very survival through foolishness, recklessness, imprudence, lack of insight into what they themselves are doing and causing. So that would be enough to talk about the changing economics and the changing geopolitical balance, but it's of course not all that we face now, because we face many other very deep and unprecedented challenges that we're trying to understand and to confront. And two more that are closely related to these economic and geopolitical trends are the ecological and technological transformations that are taking place. Of course, all of this is interconnected because we're dealing with the interconnection of many powerful underlying drivers of change. Probably technology as the most fundamental of all of them, actually, because it's technology that changes how we live, changes how we go to war, changes the balance of power in the world. But one thing that is obviously really arrived at a fundamentally transformative moment is the fact that the 200 years of industrialization that gave rise to the Western imperial dominance and that gave rise later on to the rise of Asia, again, since the middle of the 20th century, is that all of this industrialization has now impacted the physical earth in ways that are not only rather discernible and provable and dangerous, but also to an extent that is fundamentally threatening to billions of people on the planet. This is also something new. The idea that humanity could change Earth in fundamental ways is something that is less than a century old as a reality. The first way that this could have happened or could happen is through nuclear war, and now is the realization that it can happen through environmental devastation. And for me, when I think about it, we've been discussing this issue at a global level for a half century. The first conference on the ecological challenge was in Stockholm in 1972. That was also a very important year because it was the year I started university. So the notable fact for me of that year was that I was assigned a book called Limits to Growth of the Club of Rome, which had just come out. And the Limits to Growth was the first computer simulation model that tried to combine the Earth's physical systems with the socioeconomic systems. Pretty basic model, but 50 years ago, it was the cutting edge of research and understanding and a very important work. But just to share with you, in 1972, when I was assigned that book as a first-year student at Harvard College, my professor told us two things. One, don't take it too seriously. It was written by MIT professors. So this was the first thing that I was told. The second thing that I was told is don't take it too seriously. It was written by engineers, not economists. And they don't really understand that the scarcity that they talk about that will lead to the overshooting of the world and a subsequent downturn caused by the limits to growth will be reflected in scarcity prices, and so the price of scarce minerals will rise, and then ingenuity will come, and there will be substitution to other approaches. And so I was literally told in 1972, don't worry about it. And when you're a first-year student, you say, oh, that's very clever. I don't have to worry about that. I kind of believed that for a while until gradually in my own lifetime and in our experience, reality came to catch up with us. And my deeply transformative experience professionally was heading an interdisciplinary institute for Columbia University called the Earth Institute, where I had for the first time hundreds of climate scientists as my direct colleagues. And so that was a crash course in graduate school of climate science. And I can tell you, maybe there are some climate scientists here, it's a terrifying profession. I've never had colleagues who are more frightening than climatologists. because they come up to you and in a very soft voice and in a very nice way, they say, "It's worse than we thought, Jeff. It's going faster." And the most terrifying colleague I have ever had in my life is a soft-spoken, brilliant gentleman from Iowa, from the American Midwest, named James Hansen, a name that most of you will know. He was the US government's lead climatologist for 30 years, heading Goddard Institute of Space Studies, which is one of the units of the Earth Institute. Everything he told me has been right for the last 20 years, by the way, because not only did he tell me that it's worse than we thought, but he also said consistently to me back from when I joined Columbia University in 2002 until now, that what we read and hear from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is wrong because it's a consensus document that lags the cutting edge findings by 5 to 10 years. And his view, and he's been telling me correctly for the last 22 years, is that it's worse than we thought, and even scientists are doing that because what they present in each assessment round of the IPCC is what is the safe consensus of what we know, not what's most likely to turn out to be true. And Hansen has always been saying it's actually really worse than we are saying because there's an acceleration of the climate disasters. And one of the first projects of the Earth Institute when I joined was by Hansen and another absolutely brilliant, wonderful climatologist and earth scientist named Wallace Broecker, who's a name that some of you will know, Wally Broecker. He's the person who coined the term global warming, by the way, in 1974 in a science magazine, Science Journal article, and championed the idea that not only do you get warming, but you get tipping points, meaning threshold levels that when they are passed lead to very strong and dangerous non-linearities in the climate response. And he used to have on his essays a picture of a dragon and humanity poking the dragon, and he always said, "Don't poke the beast," because we're going to derange the climate system in a very nonlinear way, and it's going to be a lot worse than you think, because we're going to have a rapid feedback response. And he knew this in part because of his studies of the paleoclimate, when there were short periods of massive derangement of the climate system. And he's the scientist who also discovered what's called the thermohaline circulation, the ocean circulation system. And he said that can be turned off by too much global warming, by a change of the freshening of the water in the North Atlantic, which will stop the thermohaline circulation, and that can have a devastating consequence. And that slowing is now recorded and confirmed, just like Wally Broecker told me 22 years ago, watch out for this. So all of this is to say that this third factor, economic, geopolitics, ecological, this ecological factor has not only caught up with us, but we are at the tipping points now. We're at the threshold levels. Just to give you how frightening it is to have Jim Hansen as your colleague. We were together in Paris in December 2015 when the Paris Climate Agreement was settled. And we ran into each other in the hall, and I said, "Isn't this great?" And he said, "This is the worst possible outcome. I'm going to give a press conference denouncing this. Nobody understands how dangerous this is. This is much worse than people think. This is not going to solve the problem. It's much more dramatic. So I went to speak to the press. Hooray, the world has agreed. Jim Hansen, who knows a lot more than I do about this, went to speak to the press saying this is absolutely yet another illusion of our government's adopted and named something, but we are so far from safety and it's going to get dramatically worse. I'll give you one more Hansen fact. He has written a paper last year documenting that we have an acceleration of the rate of underlying warming, because from 1970 to 2010, roughly, the average rate of warming was about 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade. And now he says it's at least 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. So the underlying rate of warming has accelerated. Last year, depending on exactly which measure one uses, the number is slightly different, but the European Met Service uses a baseline of 1850 to 1900 as defining the pre-industrial temperature, and relative to that baseline, the Earth's average temperature last year was 1.48 degrees C, warmer than the baseline. Remember, our top limit is supposed to be 1.5 degrees C. So we were essentially already there, in part because of the intensity of El Nino, which adds something like 0.1 or 0.15 degrees C on an interannual basis. But what Hansen says is forget 1.5 degrees. We're going to shoot right through that. There's no chance, he says, to hold on to 1.5 degrees. We will surpass it. Of course, the question is, what do we do? He's not saying give up. He's saying it's far more urgent than we think. So this ecological crisis is, of course, itself multidimensional. It's not only the global warming and all of the consequences, it's the catastrophic loss of biodiversity, it's the massive deforestation, which is taking place in this country, of course, and throughout this region, in fact, taking place in all of the equatorial rainforest regions of the world, in the Amazon, in the Congo Basin, and throughout Southeast Asia. And it's the massive pollution crisis, because toxic industrial chemicals and wastes are pervasive now in the air, the fresh water, the oceans, the microplastics. And all of this is a reflection of the economic success in a way. The world's output has increased by hundreds of times relative to the pre-industrial level. Earth itself has not changed at all in its scale or fundamental Earth system, so we're really impinging on what are now called the planetary boundaries. And that's a good concept and a very useful concept, and the point of the planetary boundaries is not only are we at threshold levels that are extremely dangerous and that can lead to abrupt nonlinear change, but there are many of these thresholds that we're violating. The greenhouse gas limits, the depletion of freshwater resources, the fluxes of nitrogen and phosphorus from heavy fertilizer use, the aerosol pollutants, the other toxic chemical pollutants, the destruction of ecosystems and the loss of biodiversity. And so this is a deep phenomenon, and at the same time, the world economy is continuing to increase its pressures on all of these Earth system dynamics. And I just read, I don't know whether it was a news item or I'm out of date by some weeks, but it was said that coal use here rose again last year. All of the targets for substituting renewables were missed, and that overall coal use and emissions rose again in Indonesia and the Philippines sharply during 2023. That's a worldwide phenomenon. That's not limited to this country. But it means we've not yet even started to turn the corner on this set of interlocking ecological crises. And the fourth of these global change dynamics that are so disruptive, of course, is the suite of digital technologies that had yet another breakthrough last year that is really stunning, and that's the large language models that suddenly burst on the scene. And I don't know about you, but I talk to my large language model every day, many times. Perplexity, I find, it says, ask me anything, so I do. And I get very good answers by and large. It's true, once in a while I get a bad answer and I say, why did you say that? And it says, I'm sorry, you're right. You know, you don't get perfect answers, but you get pretty good answers. And we have amazingly discovered things about information and about what knowledge is, and very deep questions of what intelligence is in amazing ways in the last 10 or 15 years. I early on became acquainted with DeepMind, which was a great progenitor of a lot of the breakthroughs, because DeepMind had the first chess-playing world champion, and, well, actually IBM did, but DeepMind did something even more amazing in its way, which was make the world's strongest chess player in history in 4 hours, which is that it designed a deep neural network for playing chess. It had it play itself. I think it was 40 million games in a few hours. What emerged out of that very clever programming was the strongest chess player in history, starting from what the programmers called tabula rasa, a blank slate. So there were no chess experts anywhere close to this. It was only program the rules, play itself, use the deep neural network design for upgrading the system, and in 4 hours, this AI system discovered every classic chess opening that had been discovered in the last 1,000 years. And it is really amazing. So that's another revolution that we're living through. Nobody knows what it means, by the way. Nobody knows the depths of the impacts. My own shorthand view of this is that digital technology is, of course, a suite of technologies that involve several major dimensions. One is computation, a second is connectivity, and a third is artificial intelligence, and these are distinctive areas. They have been around for almost a century now. The first creation of the digital age, I date to the 1930s, to academic papers by Alan Turing, who was one of the towering geniuses of the 20th century, and in the early 1940s to John von Neumann, another towering genius, and then to the first vacuum tube computers during World War II, and the invention of the transistor in 1947, and so on. So we've been at this for around, we're the beneficiaries. I'm not an engineer, I'm an ignoramus economist, but I watch the technologies, and this is about 80 years now, but definitely accelerating, which is extraordinary. And accelerating in unpredictable ways, because there was nothing guaranteed that neural networks would be as effective as they are, for example, or that one could have models with billions of free parameters, which is how the large language models work. So we're learning all sorts of things about, again, how knowledge, information, intelligence works, and I think ultimately about our own brains and about how we work as well, because what is artificial intelligence is telling us something about what human intelligence is, or how our neural bioconnections relate to the silicon synapses in the deep neural networks. We all know that this is completely transformative, and I was going to say that it's probably as deep an effect on society as the steam engine, as electrification, as a few other major, what we call general purpose technologies have been. So we're living through something that is fundamentally transformative, I believe. It's not a quirk or a sideshow or a curiosity. I think it really will change, and is changing, of course, how we live. In fact, it's, as we all know, if you look on the street anywhere in the world, what do people do most of the time in their life now? They do that. So already it's changed fundamentally what we do hour by hour, day by day. We stare at something in our hand, which we weren't doing before quite the same way. And of course, with all of these technologies, and the steam engine perhaps being the paradigmatic transformation, because it's the steam engine that brought the industrial age, it's the steam engine that brought British and European hegemony, it's the steam engine that brought the geopolitics of imperialism, and it's the steam engine that brought the greenhouse gas emissions and the fossil fuel age and the ecological crisis. It rather is a demonstration that every major technological change is a complicated mix of good, bad, and disastrous. And artificial intelligence will be no different from that, because artificial intelligence gives us so many new ways to do things that are truly enormously positive, indeed thrilling. At the same time, artificial intelligence will completely disrupt our labor markets, the kind of jobs that are performed in the future, the way we teach, the way we use time, and we can watch almost day by day, artificial intelligence is already changing how we fight wars. And you can watch in Ukraine, this war now is different from the war in 2022, because now this is a war of drones, it's a war of surveillance, it's a war of satellite programming, it's a war of information systems in a way that it was not in the first months of this war. So even in a 2-year period, we've seen something dramatic and very dangerous, by the way. And these generals love their toys, so they want to test their weapon systems before the war ends. And I'm sure that that's one of the motivations for keeping the fighting going. Don't give up just yet. We have a good idea that's really going to be transformative. If you put all of this together, this is out of control right now. Nobody has this in control or even has a good, full conceptual grasp of what's happening in the world. If you watch the debates, I think you could agree Joe Biden does not. Okay? You could also agree that Donald Trump does not. I can assure you, no matter what happens in November, we're going to have a president of the United States that does not. And I think that it is also true for most of the world leaders. This is all pretty new, and you can't find the answers on the shelf. There's nothing we can do to pull off the shelf the solutions to any of this, because it's really not cyclical. It's not something we've seen before. This is a confluence of change that is both complex, technological, hard to understand, global scale, and only by analogy can you relate it to things that we have known in the past. We have to reinvent our governance systems. We have to reinvent geopolitics. And we have to do it. I wouldn't mind, by the way, how interesting it would be, and I'd be a lot calmer about it if it weren't for 2 points. And they're both the same. One could call them nonlinearities or threshold effects. But that's a nice way of putting the 2 points. One is that as we learn about this, we could blow ourselves up because we're in a world filled with nuclear weapons that are absolutely enough to destroy everything many, many times over. And I don't trust my government for one moment to be smart. And I think that that applies pretty much generally. So I'm afraid because I don't think there's prudence or understanding. I hate the fact that nuclear war is even mentioned, but mentioned not just in abhorrence, but I'm told by really dumb pundits in newspapers, don't worry about it. What do they know that I don't know? I've spent a lifetime studying this. I'm scared shitless, if you'll excuse me, because of how close we have come to accidents, to disasters, to games of chicken between superpowers, to crazy generals or admirals or captains or skippers that have their hands on weapon systems and so forth. I don't like it for one moment. So that's one kind of threshold effect. And the other is the ecological threshold effect, that we've got to get this right a lot faster than there is awareness of. If Jim Hansen could have a conversation with each person in the world for 30 minutes, we'd act, because everyone would come out shaking. So I'm trying to convey what I know from having had that experience for 20 years. But for most people in the world, this is not, well, I think most people in the world know something's wrong. And we've got a lot of storms and we've got a lot of droughts. Maybe the coal executives don't know it so well, or they don't want to hear it. We have a famous expression by one of our great writers, Sinclair Lewis, who said, never try to convince a person of something when his salary depends on believing something else. This is probably not only practically true, but actually even psychologically true. People don't want to believe what is not convenient to believe. And it's not just a gimmick or a lie, it's probably a psychological defense that actually functions. But we still have denial, even as we violate all of these planetary boundaries. So, I was going to talk, but the sign says time is up, about the Summit of the Future. And we're going to have a discussion, so I won't discuss it now, except I want to close by saying what that meeting aims to do. because I can describe that in 1 minute, and then we can discuss it. There are 5 themes that the Secretary General put on the table for the summit. So 5 major buckets. Number 1, sustainable development. How do we achieve a world of prosperity, environmental safety, social justice at the same time? And one major subcomponent of that is how do we finance the transformation to sustainable development? So that's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is how do we achieve peace in a world of conflict and geopolitical competition? What should we do for making peace? Good topic, core to the purpose of the UN, not functioning effectively at all right now. Third bucket, how do we govern new technologies like AI, but also others like advanced nuclear technologies, like geoengineering, which means large-scale engineering processes, for example, to reflect the sun or to put aerosols into the atmosphere to dim the sun, and many other ideas that are around. How do we govern that? And another major category, biotech, because I personally believe, maybe we can discover it, that COVID came out of a laboratory, not out of nature. And unfortunately, I studied that too much because I found out more than I had hoped to find out about all the dangerous laboratory work that the US government was funding. And I think that's what gave rise to the virus. Nobody knows for sure, but what I can tell you 100% for sure is that these dangerous activities are not properly governed at all. There's terribly dangerous research underway. So that's the third bucket. The fourth bucket is what they called youth and future generations. How do we help young people to be empowered for this complicated world that they're going to inherit? And how do we as a current generation think about stewardship towards future generations? For me, the number one word in that category is education. I think the main question is how do we help young people get the kind of education that they need to be able to live well, prosperously, peacefully, and happily in our time. And the final bucket of these 5 major categories is how do we reform the UN institutions themselves? How do we make the UN actually work in the next 75 years? We're kind of midway between the founding of the UN, which was 1945, and the end of the 21st century. So we're kind of halfway, roughly 75 years of UN work and 75 years in the future. And the question is, what do we need to do differently to strengthen the functioning of the UN? I hope we talk about that in our discussion now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for your very insightful lecture. We look forward to keep having you here. We would have the next time a keynote address. So I think it would be, with Professor Suahasil. So just, he'll be here very soon, in 1 minute, hopefully. So we'll wait for Professor Suahasil Nazara to deliver his keynote address. And thank you once again, Professor Sachs, for your lecture. And I'm sure everyone has many questions. And we'll have discussion with Ibu Mari Pangestu right after the keynote address from Professor Suahasil. Harusnya Bu Mari tadi yang naik. Cuman aku di briefing disuruh ganti Pasua. Pasua aja udah nyampe. Udah di lobby. Udah di lobby. Oh. That's 1 minute, hopefully. Welcome Professor Suahasil Nazara to the auditorium, Vice Minister of the Republic of Indonesia. As we have Pak Jisman here and he's leaving very soon, we would have a photo session with Pak Jisman, Pak Sua, Bu Mari, Prof. Jeffrey Sachs, Bu Clara, and Pak Yose on stage. Dari sini Bu, bisa Bu. Dari sini Bu. Dari sini. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Professor Suahasil Nazara, Vice Minister of Finance, Republic of Indonesia, to deliver his keynote address. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
very good morning towards and very good noon to everyone. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to be here in the middle of colleagues at the CSIS and also ladies and gentlemen, Ibu Mari, Profesor Jeffrey Sach, Pak Yose sebagai tuan rumah dari CSIS, and also ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to convey my congratulations to CSIS for holding the session today, starting this morning. And along with that, I would like to apologize to CSIS, Pak Yose, and also all colleagues from the CSIS for keep changing the schedule. Initially, I was invited for the closing like this, and then I believe my staff told the CSIS to move it to the opening. And then yesterday came the invitation for the Rapat Kabinet, and then my staff tried to move it to the session in the middle between the first session and the second session. But I just finished the coming out of the palace about less than an hour ago, so moving to the closing. So I think the correct one was the CSIS for putting me in the closing session right from the beginning. So appreciate for the CSIS and all the staff for bearing with me. Let me start with also congratulating for the report. I look at the report. I look at the presentations of the report, to be more exact, and I read it with very great interest. And I would like to convey to you several points today. First, in the global economy, Indonesia has two promises to the world. In terms of the green and sustainability. Number one, we promise the NDC. Number two, we promise the net zero emission. Now, in terms of the NDC, I think Indonesia is quite confident. A number of refinement to our NDC has been put forwarded, and I believe 2016, updated NDC 2021, enhanced NDC 2022. I believe that now the government is preparing for the next submission. I don't know what's it going to be. I don't know what else it's going to be called. But in terms of the NDC, we believe that we always deliver and we can continue to deliver to the future. My colleagues at the Ministry of Forestry and the Environment are keeping on this with the Bappenas, and the Ministry of Finance also involved. The second promise is the net zero emission in our economy for 2060 or sooner or earlier. I believe this is somewhat different. But let me put it this way. We need more and more research on this. What do we need to do? And then how likely Indonesia is going to achieve that? A number of studies has already appeared. I think last year in BS, there is a article saying that it may be a little bit difficult. So I'm not going to elaborate on that. If you like to ask why is it difficult, go ask the author. But we need more studies. We need more assessment, and we need more discussions among the researchers and policymakers. We need that. Nevertheless, despite of these two promises and also the challenge that we face, it doesn't make Indonesia short of any intention and any support for the green and the sustainability in the economy. We continue to go with that. We come up with the logic of the just and affordable transition. We need to go there. We need to go to realize the green sustainability, and we need to go there in a transition manner. It is not something that going to come up overnight. We support that. It is just that, let me quickly mention this in the beginning, and then I will mention it again in the, later at the closing. I believe every single thing that happens in the world at this moment is kind of forcing us to think about the short term. And while green and sustainability is not about short term. The regional conflict is making us thinking about what should I do in the short term? What happens in the Europe? Series of election that is taking place force us to think about what should we do? What kind of adjustment that I need to do in the short term? Yeah. UK election, France election, we start to see the results in France. And we start to think, what should we do? The global financial turbulence also making us, also kind of forcing us to think about what should we do in the short term. And we know green and sustainability is not short term. I believe that in Indonesia is also a lot of things that we think in the short term. One thing is the cycle. Of course, our political cycles now, we are looking forward to the new government in the next 3-4 months. And that is also making like a wait and see period. And together with the global forces, I believe that the important question is how can we renew our commitment to the green and sustainability from time to time so that despite the fact that we are living in the short term with the need for a short-term decisions, we still keep the long-term perspective of green and sustainability. Indonesia put it as we should come up with a just and affordable transition. Now, what does it mean? If we are thinking about the just and affordable transition, let me talk a little bit about what we do with our state budget, with your budget, because you are paying, you are the taxpayers. It's your payment to the state. It's your payment to the Republic of Indonesia. We put it in the budget. That is our budget. That is your budget. And in the budget, we try to elaborate the commitments toward the green in the 3 most important parts of the budget. Any state budget only has 3 important parts: revenue, spending, and financing. And I would like to show you a little bit today. In each part, we are committed to the green. We are committed to the transition. First, on the revenue. The easiest part to think about the revenue is that, oh, it's collecting my money. The government forced me to pay tax, so that I'm a taxpayer. The government forced me to pay the tax. Okay. Now, but revenue part of the budget is not only about collecting money. It is also about providing incentives. And a lot of incentives that are provided by the government in order to get the green economy to come up. We put a tax incentive for the project. We put tax incentive for the electric vehicles. We put tax incentive even to make sure that if you are buying an electric vehicle these days, you get the price of electricity is still subsidized by the government. So it is also part that creating the environment for the electricity to come. Then you will go to the next question. Yeah, but our electricity is still coming out of coal. That is correct. And I will touch upon that. What do we think about moving away from coal and then getting to the renewable and the new energy. But the tax incentives is something that I would like to ask researchers from CSIS and everyone else to look at what else can the government do to incentivize the green economy by way of the revenue side. Okay. Second one, on the expenditures. On the expenditures, I believe about 7-8 years ago, we start to ask the question, how much money do we spend from the state budget? How much money do we spend on the state budget? 10 years ago, nobody knows. Nobody knows how much do we spend from the budget for the climate, for the green, for the climate. So around 2015, 2016, we start to get this initiative, which we call the climate budget tagging, which is basically working with a lot of ministries, a lot of line ministries, including the Ministry of Trade, including the Ministry of Forestry, Agriculture, Fisheries, Maritime, and others, to understand how much money that every single ministry is actually spending on the mitigation and adaptation of the climate change. And of course, our colleagues from the Ministry of Forestry is putting together what does it mean? What comes under the mitigation? What comes under the adaptation? And clearly, the amount of money that this government spending is not gonna enough for tackling the climate change. Our calculation provides only one. Sukuk, which is an Islamic bonds, needs underlying. Green bonds also needs underlying. And Indonesia is not, we are never short of the underlying for these two. And by combining the two, Indonesia is putting ourselves in the international financial markets that are then making us very respectable in the sukuk and also in the green market. Starting in 2023, last year, Indonesia is also issuing the blue bonds. We issued that in the samurai bonds market. And in the samurai bonds market, this year we also already issued the samurai bonds market. Now, of all this financing structure of the state budget, I would like to mention one thing. Up to now, we do not see that the willingness to go to the green and blue and SDG is actually provides us with a more efficient yield. The market is still give us the conventional rates. We have to voice this out in the international market. we have to voice this out. Every time Indonesia, the Minister of Finance, myself, and our financing team goes to the global venues, we said that, look, you told us to issue the green bonds. It is something that is very noble. It is good for the economy. It is good for the world. But we still have not seen any premium. We do not see that the intention to issue the global bonds, the green and blue and whatever colors that maybe would be coming later, we do not see that the intention is rewarded. Of course, Indonesia is issuing that because we need the financing. But we also expect that the financing by way of the green and other SDGs would be welcomed by the world with the reward as well. So that is a very quick way of showing what the government state budget is actually do in terms of the green, as I mentioned, on the revenue, on the expenditures, and also on the financing. Now, let me now go to the next point, the carbon. Indonesia we understand that we should be in the carbon conceptual thinking about carbon more and more. We should go deep in this carbon issues. Indonesia is rich in forest, and maybe 50 years ago, if the Ministry of Forest, Ministry of Forestry issued the izin, that was the izin to cut down the trees. Right now, the izin, the concession, is the concession to keep the trees and sell the carbon, right? I think this is a very, very important way of logic that we would like to continue in the future. The concession is not to cut the tree, the concession is to keep the trees. And of course, this is very, very, we welcome this. Of course, NDC is also measured in terms of the carbon, and in terms of the market, let me just divide it by two. One is the compliance market, second is the voluntary carbon market. On the compliance market, I believe Indonesia is doing well. That is the NDC. The NDC, we fulfill all of our promises, and in terms of the compliance market, we are still waiting for the international commitment that says that we will help the developing countries, the COP, the UNFCCC should channel all of these billions and billions of dollars. We are still waiting for that. But we are not only waiting. We should prepare, Indonesia should prepare ourselves. In terms of the voluntary market, we have the logic. We need to continue with the practice. It is not yet well practiced, and I believe that it's just a matter of time that Indonesia should be more active in the voluntary market. And in order to that we provide the measures which we call the carbon tax in the newest law of the newest tax law. We have the carbon tax. We have not implemented just yet. We have not collected the carbon tax. There are voices, I believe that in many years to come, there will be greater debates whether we should implement the carbon tax immediately or to what extent that we should wait. Implementing the carbon tax immediately will really means that adding cost to our businesses. Just like the CBAM. CBAM is adding cost. It's basically, this is part of the study that is done by the DfD. It's adding cost. There is a welfare loss. I believe it was reported earlier in the session. Adding cost has welfare loss. So the question is always that how how do we put that in the, how do we compare that? The welfare laws and the noble objective that we would like to achieve. Nevertheless, our parliament has already agreed to implement the carbon tax. It's already been part of the law, and of course we are looking at the structure, at the operational measures on how to come up with the proper carbon tax in Indonesia. And of course, in the global world, we are looking at very carefully what happens in other countries as well. CBAM, I believe, is something that a noble objective, is a gesture of political will, of making sure that all imports to the EU is carbon friendly, so to speak. It is not yet happening in other parts of the world. US, for example, is not there. And I believe in this point, I really believe that if we are really care about this world, about our earth, this kind of initiative should be a global initiative. It cannot be just bilateral or unilateral. It should be multilateral. I believe that we can look at the case of, in tax, we have the Base Erosion Profit Shifting Initiative, the BEPS. Also in tax, we have the Global Minimum Tax Initiative. We have Pillar 1, Pillar 2 in the global taxation regime. Carbon should also be like that. Moving to the green economy should also be like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the carbon, the discussion also talk about the carbon leakage. I think parallel to that is also about the greenwashing. A lot of ideas about how to keep ourselves from the greenwashing. But I believe it is really a trust problem. It's a trust problem in the world. I appreciate that the COP meets every year and try to overcome with all of the discussion over there. It's really basically try to overcome the trust problem in the world. We hope it's going to continue. Now, is there any more specific, is there any more operational approach of Indonesia? I believe that this is what we have to show to the world. In order to make Indonesia trustworthy, Indonesia needs to show a lot of showcases. I would like to bring your attention to one of the energy transition mechanism that we propose. We established the energy transition mechanism with the platform, with the financial platform. SDG 1 platform under the PTSMI, ETM platform that was announced during the G20 meeting. Indonesia signed up, already signed the JETP initiative with the JETP. I believe that we follow a lot of international initiative. So in terms of the ETM, the energy transition mechanism, a lot of discussion about whether Indonesia is willing to early retire one of our coal power plant. And let me update you on that. It is not only about closing a power plant. That particular power plant is actually producing electricity for the people. And that power plant being fired by coal is cheap. Okay? We have a noble objective: reduce the carbon. Replace it with the renewables, which is more expensive. So the narratives cannot be shutting down the cheap power plant, replacing with a more expensive power plant. That narratives will always fail. we cannot create that narratives. So it should be a much better narratives. We should find a much better narratives. Not only including because it is good for the green, but also because it is good for the people. As I said earlier, just and affordable transition is for the people. Now, so that in what we have already proposed, in order for Indonesia to go to the green economy and the energy transition, it is not only about the coal power plant. It is not only about 1, 2, 5, 10 coal power plant. It is also about the grid. It is also about the transmission. It is also about the distribution to the people. So it should be bundled in such a way so that, yes, the power of the generating price probably going to be higher, but with the better grid, better transmission, better distribution, it's still going to benefit the people. This is the narrative that we are working very closely with our multilateral development partners in terms of one of the power plant that Indonesia is put on the table. We talk very closely with the Asian Development Bank. So it cannot just simply a narrative of replacing the cheaper with a more expensive one, but really creating the values for the people by putting the right ecosystem in place. So ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the numbers is already on the table. Now we are waiting for the international community, Asian Development Bank, or any other communities to really sit with us and then look at the numbers and tell us which number that is makes sense and which number that we have to design. We have to revise. In closing, again, the current situation forces us to think only about the short term. This is the most important hurdle. If we are only thinking about the short term, forget it. Everything will look expensive. We should think about the long term. So that is the takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, this is a global problem. We need trust. Developed countries, developing countries, and as a developing countries, Indonesia's position is that we are ready to open the discussion. We are ready to force ourselves so that we can put the numbers on the table. We put the concept on the table and put the numbers on the table, just like as what we are now doing for one of the coal power plant in Indonesia. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to all of you, and I wish you all good health. And once again, great appreciation to CSIS.
Thank you, Professor. Can we ask you to stay on stage as we have another, can we ask Professor Mari Pangestu and Professor Jeffrey Sachs to come on stage as well, and Pak Yose and Dandi to deliver the report to Pak Suahasil and to Jeffrey, just for one more picture, just for delivering the report. And now, we'll have Professor. Thank you, Bu Mario, for staying on stage. So we'll now have the discussion between Ibu Mari Pangestu and Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you. And thank you once again to Professor Suahasil for the keynote address.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Jeff, for giving us this, once again, wonderful, insightful, inspiring, a little bit scary speech about what's happening in the world. And I was just trying to figure out how many times you've been here. At least in my memory, 3 times. And it seems you come every decade. So in 2005, you came to give the Panglaikim Memorial Czech lecture. That's my father, Panglaikim, and it was titled "Economic Possibilities of not the Future." It was called "Economic Possibilities of Our Time." Thank you. And it was about the end of poverty theme at the time, and that was you coming out of the MDG midterm review. And you know, I was also participating in that on the poverty group. And then you came back again, I think it's about 2000, after the SDGs anyway. It was probably around 2014 or 2015, because I have a very vivid memory of you speaking in Bapenas, and really inspiring, because they had tried to embed the SDGs, and you know, they've come a long way since that time, but I remember that very well. And then you came here also to give a speech on the SDGs. And here we are today, hopefully talking about the future, right? We're talking about the challenges of the future. And as you said, we are trying to take stock of where we are and what should happen in the future. In the theme of the UN Future of the Summit. And it is really about how do we achieve sustainable development for our common future. When you were taking stock, there were a few points that were very gloomy, I would say, but actually realistic. I think you reminded us not to be in denial that these things are happening, but it is very complex, and we have a confluence of many, many things happening together, and it is complex to be able to solve. Just to I'm not summarizing, just to highlight 2 or 3 of the points you raised, that, you know, we have the end of the West or US hegemony, and we are in a multipolar world. And fortunately for Indonesia, we're in a good neighborhood, because Asia is on the rise. Asia has been on the rise, and Asia is still rising and probably still continuing its economic integration despite what's happening in the world. But we do have to pay attention to the geopolitics that's happening around us. And second, the dangers of conflict and war. I think that is a reminder for all of us. And I think you put the scary scenario out there that the difference is that you have superpowers now that have nuclear power, and that not only will they probably, no one side will win and the world will be destroyed as a result, That's kind of the worst case scenario. And then we have the ecological crisis with all the consequences on growth, economic development, people, and the planet. And just to summarize, I think your diagnosis or prognosis, it's worse than what we thought. It's happening faster than what we thought. And probably we are beyond the tipping points, or maybe the science, the cutting edge science is telling us that we are already beyond the tipping points. And at the same time, we are not yet anywhere near taking the actions with urgency that are needed. And actually, Suahasil just then, the Vice Minister of Finance, he actually gave us a sobering reminder. Because of all that confluence of crisis that we are facing, we are now more likely to take a short-term outlook rather than a longer-term outlook, which is needed if you are going to take the climate action that's needed. And you can see after the energy crisis that we faced in 2021, 2022, that the West that has always been trying to lecture us, I suppose, on accelerating energy transition, they are also slowing down their energy transition, even though they say this is a pause as we deal with the energy crisis. So I think we are not in a good situation there. And of course, then finally, you talked about the technological transformation and the large machine learning, reminding us that in every technological transformation, there are always the positives. And in this case, machine learning, we see how it can lead to increased productivity, including part of the solution of the climate change, and the technologies that can help us are there also, but also the negatives. We've seen the dark side of this possibility of the machine learning, as well as the transformations in society. So I think you've painted for us the taking stock picture, but let's get, you didn't really have much time to get into the answers, the solutions. What do we need to do? What's the to make sure that we are not going to have a disastrous future, but we want a sustainable development for our common future. So I'm going to kick off with one or two questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Let me start with the most top-of-mind question for many of us about war, how to prevent war and conflict. And the dangers that you really outline, which is pillar 2, if I'm not mistaken, or theme 2 of the Summit of the Future. How can we achieve peace? Because without peace, I think a lot of the other discussions is moot. And in the light of that, the UN has so far not been able to put a halt to the major geopolitical crisis that we are facing. What kind of UN reforms are we imagining? And if not just the UN reforms, what kind of other governance that needs to be in place for us to achieve peace? And most importantly, given where we are today, what would be the role for Asia, Southeast Asia, and Indonesia within that?
Great. Thanks so much. And thank you for a very good, quick, again, overview of these issues. And I want to say, before I get to the question of peace, what the Vice Minister said is very right, that we're pushed to the short term, but we absolutely cannot function as a series of short terms. Crisis management is not strategic change. And this is the Center for Strategic and International Studies, so we need strategic change. And the way that the Paris Agreement is structured, there are two components to it. One is the nationally determined contributions. What are we going to do in the next few years? And the other, the minister mentioned, and I had some role in putting that into the agreement, what's called Article 4.19, which is the long-term low-emission strategies. As far as I'm concerned, that's critical. What is the real strategy? Not what's the aim. It's nice to say our aim is decarbonized by 2060, but what is the actual roadmap to get there? What is the primary energy mix that this country will have? To what extent will the different parts of this country be isolated or part of a common grid? To what extent will Indonesia be interconnected with Australia or with the rest of ASEAN countries through the physical interconnectivity of a power system? Because that will shape a lot. Of course, we don't know all the answers to that, but what's the vision? What is the practicality? What would it cost? I'm not, by the way, a great fan of this JET-P, which is, I think, pushed by the United States or Europe. It's a typical, to my understanding, maybe I'm wrong, but to my understanding, it's a little bit of a gimmick, which is, okay, shut down some power plants. Not how do you make the full transformation? How is it going to be financed? Shutting down power plants is not necessarily the right thing to do with new capital. Stopping new investments in them, I'm sure, is the right thing to do. So don't build new ones, because then it's just creating another mess for the next 40 years. But shutting down existing plants is very expensive. The capital's already sunk. The investment's already made. So it's a little bit of a gimmick, and it's not the core of the issue. The core of the issue is, where is your zero carbon power going to come from in 2050? This country needs a lot more power per capita than it has. So the energy has to rise in per capita terms significantly. But what kind of energy? Where? Where is it going to be transmitted? How will a grid be resilient in this context? So I would like to see such numbers, and then the key investments, and then the question, how is this going to be done? And then, okay, what years will different power plants be retired becomes a question within that broader context, but not a standalone project. So that's, I think, what the long-term, it's not even long-term anymore. It's just not year to year. It's 25-year or 30-year perspective. This is really, to my mind, the perspective that we need right now. Let me turn back to the question of war and peace. To my mind, war and peace requires the same kind of analytics as a question of how to decarbonize. In other words, if you want to end the war in Ukraine, it isn't sufficient to say war is terrible, we should end the war. It is necessary to say, why is this war being fought? Who is fighting this war? What are the motivations of the different actors? Political, geopolitical, strategic, and so forth. What kinds of outcomes could be achieved through negotiation? Typically, negotiation has to be superior to the best alternative of a non-agreement. So if the two sides have the option to continue fighting, is there something that is preferable for the two sides to stop fighting? The answer generally is yes, in that war is not a Pareto optimal solution to many things. It's very destructive. People lose their lives. There's massive destruction of property, hundreds of billions of dollars already destroyed in Ukraine, probably 500,000 Ukrainians dead from this war since the intensification of the war in February 2022. This is not the efficient solution, I'm sure. So you need an analysis. What's going on here? I've given my own analysis. I give it daily in whatever social media I can, because I'm trying to add pressure to the US government, because I regard the US government as the real source of this war, not Putin. In the West, Putin is the source of the war. The favorite word in the Western media is unprovoked, that Putin made an unprovoked attack February 24th, 2022. Unprovoked, you could say, is uncaused, or caused by a complete idiosyncrasy. But Aristotle already taught us, at least in Western thought, 2,350 years ago, that things have causes. And this war has causes too. By the way, why is it called unprovoked? Because our government wants us to be dumb, as far as I'm concerned. They don't want us to know the causes. They want us to say, he's evil, we're good, we fight him. Now, why would they want to say that? Because they have an agenda. And it's not a very smart agenda in my view, but it is an agenda, but they don't want to spell out their agenda honestly. So it requires a little bit of analytics to do. I happen to have been close up to much of that agenda for a long time over the last 30 years, so I've seen a lot of it. The agenda, in my view, is the United States wants to be the most powerful country in the world as an objective. It's a very strange objective. An objective for a country should be live well, be secure, be happy, be prosperous, not be number one. Because to have the objective be number one, it means we have to dominate someone else. And two countries come to mind for the US. One is we dominate Russia, and the other is we dominate China. So I believe that this is quite juvenile. I would say it is foreign policy by junior high school logic, not by grown-up logic. And this, to my mind, is, whose clique is more popular? Who's more powerful? So I regard it as very juvenile. It's called realism in international relations theory, the fight for hegemony. But my favorite political scientist in this genre, and he's a wonderful person, very, very smart, named John Mearsheimer, whom everybody knows. His book is called The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. And I want to write the comedy, not the tragedy. You know, okay, I don't want a book that says, here's why we have tragedy. I want to solve the problem. So I say to him all the time, John, we need a happy outcome, not a tragic outcome. And he says, no, it's not possible. This is reality. And I say, no, that's not reality. We're not doomed to war. So, just to summarize, every crisis needs analytics. In my view, nothing is unprovoked. We need to understand causes, dynamics, and choices. My understanding of the war in Ukraine is that about 99% of it comes from a bad idea that the United States adopted in the mid-1990s to extend NATO to wherever it wants. And do you know that these people want to extend NATO to East Asia? They want NATO, which means North Atlantic, to have its offices in Tokyo, in Seoul. What is the matter with these people? Could they look at a map? Honestly, I mean it really. And do they know that NATO was founded in 1949 to prevent an invasion by the Soviet Union? What's that? It doesn't even exist anymore. So it went from being a defensive organization against a conventional war by the Soviet Union to being an American expeditionary army. And this is dangerous. Other countries don't want that. China does not want NATO on its border, for heaven's sake. Why would we put it there? Because we have a death wish? No. This is ridiculous. And why would you put NATO in Ukraine? I'll tell you, there's no chance in the world that NATO is going to be in Ukraine, because the world will actually end before that happens. Because the Soviet Union, Russia, will not allow that to happen. They don't want the US military and US missiles on their border. And they'll fight to that, and they will escalate. And they happen to have 6,000 nuclear warheads. And it's real for them. And if I were in their position, I would take the same view. I would say to the United States, keep out of my neighborhood. We can make peace, we can live peacefully, but we don't want your missiles across the street from us. And that is why we have the war. So if you ask me, what do we do to stop the wars? Each one we look at and say, what's really going on here? Let's be grown-ups, not junior high school. And I see three conflicts right now that are devastating. One is Ukraine. I want the United States to call the Russian leadership and say NATO expansion to Ukraine was a bad idea. It stops. We don't do it. Now you stop fighting. We stop the NATO expansion. We negotiate a peace agreement. I believe that's completely feasible. Israel and Palestine, you have 100 years of history. Two peoples hate each other at this point, and they will not negotiate peace together. So I would like the world to say, here is what's going to happen, not leave it to two belligerents where each side has an extremist veto over any compromise. And the current Israeli government is by far the most extremist, militarized, nasty government in that country's history. And so they need to be told there's going to be a state of Palestine next door, whether you like it or not. And I want the UN Security Council to vote that and impose it with peacekeepers, with all the instruments of the UN Charter. And by the way, that could happen in one day if the United States would stop defending Israel, which I want it to do. I don't want it to stop defending Israel's safety. I want it to stop defending Israel's veto over Palestine's right of self-determination. And this could happen in one day. So that's the second crisis. You see, it might take 3 days to end these problems. Each one can have one day. Then we can get on to climate change. And the third crisis is with China. And the issue with China, in my opinion, is that China has a very deep-seated fear of being dismantled or threatened by the United States, and not for paranoid reasons. Because the United States wants to be the world's hegemon, and China prevents it. And so the US has turned rabidly anti-Chinese in its rhetoric, in its punditry, in its politics. And the Chinese look at that, and that's not a very good situation to be in. And so they are absolutely going to defend China's interests, in my view. And the flashpoint of this right now is two issues. One is Taiwan, and there, in my own opinion, there is one China, and Taiwan is part of one China. And if Taiwan were to declare independence because Taiwanese politicians decide that, they would destroy their country. They would destroy Taiwan. And if the United States tried to defend Taiwanese independence, it would destroy the world. So we should be very clear. And I said to friends in Taiwan last year when I had the good chance to be there, don't end up like Ukraine. Don't think the US can protect you. The US can never keep you safe, period. And the more weapons you take from the US, the less safe you will be. The main way to be safe is to say to the United States, thank you very much, stay home. Honestly, we'll work it out ourselves across the straits. Because China, mainland China, does not want a war. It doesn't want independence of Taiwan. That's a big difference. And it doesn't want the US meddling in this. And we don't need speakers of the House of Representatives of the United States flying to Taiwan over the objection of Beijing. So this is junior high school. Honestly, I'm going to come over whether you like it or not. This is what passes for American foreign policy. And the second issue is the South China Sea and the trade routes and your Straits of Malacca and everything else. China depends on safe sea routes. The United States publishes 100-year studies of choke points. So let us be clear about safety of navigation, and let's be clear about the dangers of invoking choke points, and let's be clear that we don't want any hegemons, period. Not the United States, not China, not anybody else. And then maybe we could overcome what is called the security dilemma, where each side takes actions that are viewed as hostile to the other for defensive purposes or supposed defensive purposes, and all you get is escalation. And I think that all of these conflicts are solvable, and it comes to your question, what should Indonesia do about this, and what can be done in general? The main thing we need, the main thing we need in this world beyond everything else is diplomacy. Diplomacy means you talk to someone you don't like or someone on the other side. It's so basic, but can you believe Biden and Putin have not talked once since January 2022? Are you kidding? Every day I say, and I'll say it again right now, Mr. President Biden, you can use my Zoom account. Call your counterpart, have a chat. It may be, by the way, and I mean this seriously and I mean it with worry, maybe he's not capable of this now. I don't think he's capable of being president right now. I think this is a sad fact. It's not about being a candidate. We need a president that's not 81 years old and suffering from, no, but it's not a joke. It's actually very serious. I mean it seriously. And I don't mean it as a flip point or as a partisan point. I mean it that we have a 25th Amendment, and I think it should probably be invoked, which is that we need a president that can function right now, because I'm not sure we have it. And if he can function right now, let him take some cognitive tests by independent expertise and confirm that this is possible, because what we saw in the debate was completely alarming, but not different from what I hear from a lot of people and not different from what we're seeing with our own eyes. So this is not prudent. But in any event, aside from the short term, the real problem is we don't have diplomacy. And the U.S. mentality is we have allies. We have friends and allies. That's the favorite expression of U.S. foreign policy. It's a terrible phrase. We don't need friends and allies. We need cooperation globally. We don't even need allies. We just need the UN Charter, the international rule of law, the role of the UN Security Council. We don't need NATO. We really need peaceful cooperation under the UN Charter. China is not going to attack the United States. Russia is not going to attack Europe. This is simple. Why the hell would they? They won't. There's no interest in the world in it. But if you're provoked, you'll respond. That's the tragedy. So this is what we really need, and we're not getting it right now, and it's dangerous. So, sorry, what should Indonesia do? Indonesia, together with your neighbors, especially in ASEAN, should say, we have stakes in this. We want peace. We do not choose sides. That's a tradition of this country. It used to be, and the U.S. idea was you're either for us or you're against us. You know, non-aligned was an evil word in the U.S. political lexicon, as we know. But it's actually the truth, which is say to both sides, sit down and talk. Use the good offices of ASEAN to say to Russia and the U.S., talk to each other. Push the point of diplomacy. say with respect to Palestine, the Palestinian state now, and tell the United States, stop being the one country to block it, because it's literally one country blocking Palestine as a member state of the United Nations. So this is, to my mind, where Indonesia really comes in. It's your major country, you're the fourth largest country in the world. ASEAN has 660 million people. The world economy has a huge, huge footprint here. There's an ability to say, come on, diplomacy, stop the military buildup, stop the military approaches to this. We want a different kind of approach. And by the way, say it also to Japan and to Korea, because the Japanese and the Koreans are very much under the US influence, as you know. And so they repeat very hostile anti-China rhetoric. And this is no good. It's very bad for this region, it's very bad for them. And so this is partly what also needs to happen.
Thank you so much, Jeff. A strong call for ASEAN to strengthen its regional approach, not just within ASEAN as ASEAN, but with the other countries in the region. And we hope that this message will also be heard and resonate with the next government. So in the interest of time, I think we have about 10-15 minutes left. Let me now open the question to the audience. And do you mind if I take 3 questions in a row? And if you want a piece of paper and pen to note down. Okay. May I invite Ibu Susanti Sitorus, Direktur Eksekutif of Virya Visi Indonesia Raya Emisi Nol Bersih, which is Indonesian vision for zero clean carbon, I guess, zero emission, sorry.
Net zero emission.
Net zero emission.
Right. Thank you very much for giving me this first opportunity, Bu Mari. Hello, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. My name is Susanti Sitorus. I'm the Executive Director of Virya YNB, the first ever climate foundation in Indonesia. We were established to support Indonesia in achieving net zero emission, particularly in the energy-related sector. So my question, I would like to emphasize more on the forward-looking side of things. You alluded to many challenges that happened at the scale and the speed. Some are unprecedented and makes our leaders having no guidance, no start, and they cannot pull anything from the shelves to guide them. So I think that's probably also what's happening also with other groups, not just our leaders. And I'd like to focus on one particular group, the economists. Who are in many countries, including in our countries, they shape the policy, the economic policy of the government. And so I joined an international workshop last year, and then one of the from the economists from an advanced economy said, well, climate change wrecked our analytical tool set. So this, I think, in many developed or developing economies, actually, there need to be a reflection among economies of what kind of perspectives or, I said, analytical tool set that they need to update or they need to change in order for them to be, to be able to advise the policy, but also guide the society, to the goal that we want to be, a net zero society, advanced economy, with prosperity, equity, and so on. So I'd like you to just share your thoughts about what economists should do, not just addressing today's problems, but also the challenge of our future. Thank you.
Okay, second question. I saw Tisa, you raised your hand. Tisa Mafira, maybe you can introduce yourself rather than me introducing you.
Thank you, Bu Mari, Professor Sachs. My name is Tiza from Climate Policy Initiative, a think tank. And my question is on your first bucket, Professor, on finance. And I think we should be cautious about characterizing the climate crisis as a problem of the future, because we are experiencing the heat waves today, we are experiencing the floods, the crop failures today with thousands of lives lost today. So I think that there's no question that the cost of inaction soon, not later, but soon, surpasses the cost of accelerated action now. Now, Professor, you are a huge proponent of accountability for rich countries' historical emissions and foreign aid, but as we know, the foreign aid that has been coming into Indonesia is mostly in the form of debt. And we've seen the idea, just the very idea of foreign debt being weaponized against climate action. So for example, we hear narratives like, oh, forget the JETP, it's all debt. Let's just keep our coal, it's cheap, right? It's a very powerful narrative despite coal being cheap because of the subsidies, right? So the dilemma is foreign debt now versus cost of inaction later or soon. Is that an avoidable dilemma? Of course, the alternative is Indonesia could say, we can finance everything ourselves, we're a growing economy, we've got good GDP, we can finance the energy transition by ourselves. But the dilemma there is that we don't want to let the rich countries off the hook for their historical climate emissions. So that's another dilemma which, I was wondering whether that's also avoidable. What's the best course forward? Thank you.
Yes, I think developing countries are asking, where's the money? If you ask us to be more ambitious, where's the money? Another question, I have room for a third question. I guess I will let the gentleman here, because I've had two ladies, so please introduce yourself. Sorry, Mike, please. Coming.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Rio. I'm an independent researcher. I'm going to ask a simple but maybe a hot question to remember. So, in your opinion, Professor, what would the world need? What kind of leadership the future world needs? So, in current situation, it's in state of chaos. So, cooperation is just like something performative. So, maybe it will be great that each and every country hold hands together and singing Kumbaya for world peace, but I don't really see that in coming to quote-unquote reality. Or let me tell you what I have experienced working in a corporate that still acts like a startup. Only one guy do the heavy lifting and everyone else just sit and cross their hands. Thank you.
Maybe one more question, because I feel like I was unfair. I didn't choose this side. Oh boy, there's three there. I don't know, maybe the gentleman with the cap. So sorry, that's going to be the last question.
I think my question is two things. One is about the analyzing, as you say, it's about reporting. The CSIS Indonesia doesn't even have the reporting on the emission to the military operation. US itself also has some problems. There are some thrown out, even the US Navy that are studying in Oxford, he say like the warfare, I don't know why is US so obsession with the warfare, which is, the warfare is actually come from Sun Tzu, right? The war is not just when there's a missile coming, it's before that. So there is an incident recently happened in South China Sea in Thomas Shoal, the sonar buoy. This sonar buoy has been dropping since 1974 in Malacca for the oil exploration. But this extended material, they call it, it's you know, the production is from 93 pounds to 298 pounds. There is, you don't see any material safety data on this sonar buoy. And US has been producing it one
Could you
year,
just
like
please
7 million.
get to your question, please?
So my question is, one is about the reporting on the military. Second is about the warfare, because US has been launching like terrorist warfare, right now it's anti-submarine warfare.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jeff, you have 4 questions. I apologize to the audience if we don't have more time for all of your questions.
Thank you. Thanks for all of the questions. On what economics says about climate change. On the positive side, economists recognized decades ago that normal market economy would not address a climate crisis properly because there is not the proper incentives to limit emissions. And the first model of this, the first economic theory of this, was by the Yale professor William Nordhaus, who got the Nobel Prize for his model of climate change. He has the right concept, but he had the wrong data. And the right concept was that you should limit emissions if the costs of the emissions are greater than the costs of the abatement. But when he put it in the model, he underestimated the risks and the damages. And so his conclusion from his model was, it's a problem, but not too big a problem. And this really was a kind of conclusion of the early economics work. Since then, the climatologists and the ecologists have emphasized that the dangers are much, much greater than we think, because nature is being deeply perturbed. Even human physical survival and heat waves are much endangered. We had maybe 1,000 people dropping dead in the Hajj just this past month because of the Saudi temperatures. So the dangers, or the damages so-called, are much, much greater. And if you put that into the calculation, then and you put into the calculation this threshold effect, then you reach a different conclusion from Nordhaus. You reach the conclusion, we need to stop these emissions and keep the climate safe. The translation of that in public policy was stay below 1.5 degrees warming. Jim Hansen said, no, that's not good enough. Stay below 1 degree warming. In other words, we've already overshot the safe margin. Now we have to reduce the concentration of greenhouse gases over the next 100 years so that we reduce the temperature back to a safe limit. Either way, the message is, like your foundation, we need to decarbonize. We need to do that very quickly. Economists can play a useful role in that by asking the question, what is the efficient way to do that? Because this requires a lot of investment. What's the low-cost way to achieve decarbonization? Should Indonesia rely on wind and solar power? Should it introduce nuclear energy? Should there be a regional power grid? These are not only questions to be debated qualitatively, they can be analyzed quantitatively. That's why I want every government to make, under Article 4.19, an actual set of calculations. I work with a modeler named Jim Williams at University of San Francisco. And when he makes an analysis for the United States, he does 7 or 8 scenarios. This one assumes nuclear power. This one assumes no nuclear power. This one assumes carbon capture and storage. This one assumes no carbon capture and storage. This one assumes a nationwide power grid. This one assumes 3 regional power grids. In other words, do the numbers. Run the numbers. Find out what is the best way. To this day, I don't know the answer for this country. What is a realistic power mix by 2050 for decarbonization? Put aside Jet P and all the rest. Just what should this country rely on for its power? How much will be needed, given that we're going to be riding in electric vehicles? You're going to need a lot more power generation in 30 years, given that every time you ask an AI system for an answer, which will do, you're going to need power behind that. Where is it going to come from? Is nuclear power to play a big role here? Nuclear power has one huge advantage, which is it's a lot of energy in it without a lot of space required. So it's actually got a very high concentration. For a crowded country like this, that might make sense. On the other hand, there are downsides that are significant. In seismic regions, in tsunami regions, in so forth. What's the answer here? What are the trade-offs? These are analytical issues that are not straightforward. Politicians cannot answer these questions alone, certainly. The public cannot answer them without CSIS doing detailed studies of what the alternatives are. Maybe you have, and I need to read them, which I will do. But this is, I think, the core of what economists should do right now, which is ask, what are the alternative pathways? What are the estimated costs given the technology and the prospects for the technologies? What are the trade-offs and risks for the alternative approaches? So that's what I would say. I think there's a big role there. On the question of financing, there are 3 different issues at least, so it's not an absolutely simple question. First, is some kind of debt financing necessary for financing the energy transition? The answer almost surely is yes, because when you build capital-intensive anything, debt financing makes sense. You pay for the capital services over time rather than upfront by a major capital investment. So debt financing will play a role. Second question, how are developing countries supposed to do the debt financing when they pay excessive interest rates on the debt? Because the international system gives low interest rates in general to richer countries, higher interest rates to poorer countries. There's a big set of questions. Is that fair, efficient, right, proper, and so on? In my view, this pricing of debt is not done properly, not just fairly, but even analytically properly. It allows rich countries too much slack, and poor countries that are good credit risks, it charges an excessive cost. That's a debatable point, but that's my own view. The practical matter is there is not a single low-income country in the world that has an investment-grade credit rating. That means they can never achieve decarbonization on their own without some solution to the financing challenge. So that's a second issue which is high on the political agenda, very low on the US agenda, because the US doesn't want to pay. And then the third is related to what you said, which is historical responsibility. When you're rich and powerful, the favorite word is unprovoked. you don't want anyone to trace any history. Because if there's history, you're responsible for something. The whole idea of being powerful is you don't have responsibility. You do what you want. So the United States does not want to be told, you made this problem. You know what? The US made this problem disproportionately. It was 25% of the emissions historically. But try telling that to the billionaires that live across Central Park from me. I'm on the poor side of Central Park. On the west side, they're on the east side of Central Park, but I sometimes go billionaire watching. There are 46 of that species in my neighborhood. They don't want to be told they have historical responsibility. They want to go to the Hamptons on the weekend. That's their major goal in life, it seems. So we need to tell them, you have historical responsibility. Stop running away. You have to help pay for this. So this is another point where the world that is not the 15% of the rich, of the population in the rich world, needs to tell the 15%, you're part of this world too, you can't run away. Oh, US congressmen would hate this, believe me. And the whole US, by the way, fascinating, it was designed, really designed to protect rich people. John Locke, our lead philosopher from Britain, wrote in 1690 in the second treatise on government in Britain that the purpose of government is to protect private property. And we had a revolution against taxes from Britain. Our government was founded on the right to low taxes. And the Constitution was written by a very brilliant, very rich person named James Madison, who was afraid that if we had only state-level governments, then there would be enough power to tax the local rich people. But if we had a federal government far away in Washington, D.C., the rich people would be safer. And so he wanted a federal government rather than local government to keep private property more safe. So you're facing a problem, which is that the two hegemons of the last 200 years, Britain and the US, were designed to keep taxes low and to not hear what you asked me about historical responsibility. But on the other hand, as I keep saying, we're in a new geopolitical era. So keep raising the point, because it's important. We need rich countries to do more than their current share because of what they have contributed to the crisis that we face today. So in my view, that is absolutely a real issue. I have proposed a tax that the rich countries would pay on carbon emissions, both current and historical, to help finance some of the transformation. And this is what I think we could raise by a global assessment, something like 200 billion a year flow, which then could be used not just as a gift, but to help lower the interest rates on long-term finance. There's nothing wrong with bond financing if the interest rates are okay. And so I think that there are ways to do this. Final question, or final two questions, I should say. First, on the reporting of U.S. military, just in general, and the accountability. There is no accountability. Everything is secret. That's part of our problem. If there were more transparency on everything, we would understand that we're creating trouble that should not be created. So there's very little accountability. And again, powerful countries don't like accountability. They don't want historical responsibility, and they don't want current accountability. So almost everything that I hear from Washington is not true. This is a problem. You can figure out what's not true, but it takes a little bit of effort. You can ask perplexity, although then it just repeats the conventional wisdom, because it has skimmed the internet to give you the answer. So we need to go a little bit beneath the surface. Let me conclude with the question, what kind of global leadership? What should the world actually look like? And the point I want to make is the following. We've had less than a century in all of human history of a concerted attempt at true global governance. The first time we had any kind of international governance was the League of Nations in 1921, after World War I. But this was, first of all, an enterprise very much controlled by the British and by the Europeans in general. So it wasn't an enterprise aiming at ending the imperial empires. It invented new ways to run empires, such as mandates under the League of Nations Charter. That's what ruined the Middle East for 100 years. The British meddling with its mandates and the French meddling with its mandates and so forth. So that was the first attempt, 1921. It failed terribly. The United States didn't join. It proved to be a completely ineffective organization. And World War II arose, and in 1942, in the middle of the war, Franklin Roosevelt, who was our greatest president, said we need something to supersede the League of Nations. So the US during the war started planning for the post-World War II era with the United Nations. This was America's best idea, and it's really a very, very good idea. But two things intervened. The US gave special privileges to 5 powerful countries, the so-called Permanent Five, which the US, Russia, China, Britain, and France, who were the allied powers of World War II. So this is one problem with the actual functioning. And second, the United States became a new kind of empire after World War II. It said, well, we have the UN, but we also have what the US now calls the rules-based order. If anyone can ever figure out what that is, let me know. Because it's never been defined, it's completely phony, it's almost a joke, except it's said by people who have serious jobs, like the President of the United States. But there are no rules, and it's not an order. It's the US does what it wants. So this is really a problem. What do we want? What do we want for the future? I would say the following things, quickly. First, we want true international law. That means that powerful countries are subject to the law as well as weak countries. That the United States would abide by the UN Charter, for example. That's number one. All major powers. Second, we want a UN that is effective enough to be able to do its job. And that requires a lot of discussion, but it requires, for example, a much larger budget that is not dependent on the voluntary contributions of the individual member states, but is collected through a kind of global taxation automatically that goes to the UN level. So the US can't turn on the tap and turn off the tap, but we have an effective UN. It requires reform of UN institutions, how the Security Council works. The Security Council is a wonderful idea, but it doesn't function because of the veto, and it could function in the future. Remember, it's an early experiment, this kind of global rule. We've never had it before. So don't give up on it. Don't be cynical. Just realize how young it is from the point of view of human history. And remember that the international system was built by the Europeans on the nation-state model. And that model is deeply flawed because it leads to too much war. But that was the European way for 1,000 years, war. So we need something that is better than that. So the UN and international law. And the final points I would make, or the final point is regional cooperation is extremely important because of economic and technological and ecological realities. 10,000 years ago, the village was enough because living at subsistence or foraging, you had a very local reach. Maybe 3,000 years ago, a city-state was enough. Maybe 1,000 years ago, actually something of a larger geographic area. Of course, we had large empires by then, the Han Empire, the Mauryan Empire, the Roman Empire, and so forth at that stage. Today, even the largest nations are not self-sufficient. They cannot possibly be. So the US or China or Russia, too small, even though they're giants. And Indonesia, very large population, but you can't solve these problems without your neighbors, any of them. So regional cooperation is much more important today as a technological, economic, financial, and ecological reality. Make ASEAN something real. Make RCEP something real. Real. Not only a trade group, but a society, a region of peace, of cultural exchange and diversity, of movements of people, free movements of people, and of a common ecological approach. And I would like to see regions of the world cooperating with each other at a regional level. By the way, just a plug, ASEAN should have an ASEAN Green Deal, and Europe has its European Green Deal, and that's a good way to talk about specific issues with each other, things like CBAM and so forth. Discuss it region to region, and there'll be a lot of headway.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. Tour de force. I apologize that I was not a good moderator and we went over time, but I think it was worth it, right? And we will be feeding you after this, correct? I hope I got that right. So there's a reward at the end of this very, very inspiring session. Let me just conclude with my two main takeaways, and these are important takeaways for Indonesia. I think you really highlighted that the dangers of inaction is so much greater than the ambition that we need to accelerate action now. But the problem is what should countries do? And I think you outline Article 4.19, the real strategy in the long term and how to have real scenarios and pathways. And I'm happy to report that there is an initiative going on of which CSIS is part of. It's called iClimb. And it is about all the climate modeling that's being done. Does it include the government also, what's happening? Yes, also because Bappenas also has a systems-based modeling. So these are all the modeling on climate they've got together, and hopefully we can contribute to defining quantitatively what should be the different pathways, the different options for achieving both climate and development. I think that's really the objective. So watch that space, because I think that's a really, really important point. And then the money can come, right? Or together, because the money, this needs to be translated into investments and projects, and then the money, whether it's government, whether it's private, whether it's concessional, and so on. Second point that you made very strongly is the importance of Indonesia and the region in its role, whether it's for peace or for climate change or for just enforcing the importance of international cooperation. And I believe that Indonesia and ASEAN needs to play a role in the global multilateral fora as well as in its own region. So really, I hope that's the big message that all of us can go away with and all of us can contribute to the continued discussion on this and giving input to the incoming government. So another round of applause for Jeff, and thank you everybody. Thank you. You've been a great audience.
Thank you very much, Bu Mari, and thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for today's very insightful discussion. We truly appreciate all of you for the time and effort you all took to be here. As a housekeeping note, I have 2 notes. So the first one, lunch is available in the free function room just outside the auditorium. And the second one is those who are invited to participate in the science panel for Borneo to meet on the 5th floor, room 542 at 2:10 p.m. Thank you. So I'll repeat it again. Those who will be participating at the science panel for Borneo to meet on the 5th floor, room 542 at 2:10 p.m. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you soon at the CSIS event. Thank you. Thank you.
542, right?
Yes, 542.
Had to stop him.
Panjang banget.